You weren't born with free will. You were born into programming. Not lines of code, but patterns of pain, ritual, biology, and myth, recycled so long you mistook them for nature. You want cheat codes? Here's the first one. The game is rigged because you're not the player. You're the product. The first lie: you are conscious. You think you're awake because your eyes are open, because your mind is chattering, because the world responds when you touch it. But consciousness, the feeling of being you, is not a signal. It's a byproduct, a side effect, a hallucination. Let's start with a riddle you've never stopped to ask. If you are conscious, if you are in control, why can't you stop your thoughts? Why can't you shut your mind off at will? Why do you only notice your awareness in hindsight, like a reflection after the ripple has passed? Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet tried to answer that. In 1983, he asked people to flex their wrist whenever they wanted while monitoring their brain activity. The results should have been obvious. Decision first, brain signal next, motion last. But that's not what he found. What he found was worse. Libet's data showed the brain made the decision before the person was aware of choosing it. You read that correctly. The brain initiated the movement up to 500 milliseconds before the subject reported the conscious decision to move. The command came first. The illusion of free choice arrived late, a ghost of agency trailing after the fact. Your awareness is not the driver. It is the narrator of a car already in motion. But you don't stop to question this because the story flows so smoothly. The mental voice, your internal monologue, never stumbles. It explains your actions, justifies your feelings, narrates the past with hindsight clarity, so it feels like you're in charge. You're not. Psychologists call it the interpreter module, located in your brain's left hemisphere. This module is constantly stitching reality together, not based on facts, but on coherence. If something happens that doesn't make sense, the interpreter doesn't say, "I don't know." It invents a story. It fills in blanks. It lies beautifully to keep the ego intact. In 1996, Dr. Michael Gazzaniga performed an experiment on split-brain patients, individuals whose corpus callosum, the bridge between the two brain hemispheres, had been severed to treat epilepsy. He showed one image to the left visual field processed by the right brain and a different image to the right visual field processed by the left brain. Then he asked the patient to explain what they saw. When the right brain was given the command walk, and the left brain was asked why they stood up and left the room, the patient replied, "I'm going to get a Coke." Not, "I don't know." Not, "My body just moved." But a rational narrative, fabricated in real time to preserve the illusion of intention. Let that sink in. Your brain will invent reasons for your behavior, just to keep the story of you intact. You're not thinking your thoughts, you're watching them, and then you're claiming ownership after the fact. Still believe you're conscious. Let's go deeper. Have you ever walked into a room, forgotten why, and walked back out? That wasn't a glitch. That was your cognitive model reloading context. Your self is state-dependent. You exist differently in different environments. The room wasn't wrong. Memory isn't a database. It's a reconstruction. Each time you recall a memory, you're not pulling a file, you're repainting a canvas. Slightly different, slightly distorted. Your past isn't preserved, it's overwritten. Again and again. How can you be conscious when the self you remember is a collage of fictions? Now zoom out. Look at attention. You believe you see the world, but vision itself is a trick. The fovea, the only part of your eye with high-resolution vision, covers less than 0.1% of your visual field. Everything else is a blurry guess, filled in by your brain. You're not seeing reality. You're seeing a simulation your mind renders. On demand, but it gets worse. Your brain has a blind spot. A literal hole in your vision where the optic nerve connects, yet you never notice it. Why? Because your mind fills it in automatically. Without your knowledge, this means you are constantly hallucinating part of your experience, but the hallucination feels seamless, because the interpreter makes it so. Now, think about your emotions. You feel fear, shame, lust, joy, and you think these are reactions. But most of your emotional responses are precognitive. The amygdala activates before your prefrontal cortex even knows what's happening. Your feelings are decisions your body has already made, and your mind, it's just playing catch-up, telling stories to make those feelings make sense. Let's summarize this code you were never taught. The brain acts before the mind chooses. The narrator invents stories to explain behavior it didn't initiate. Vision is mostly illusion, hallucinated into coherence. Memory is rewritten, not recalled. Emotions are embodied, not chosen. Consciousness is retrofitted, not real -time. So here's the cheat code. You aren't conscious. You're a post-processed story of consciousness, a delayed echo, stitched into the meat of your brain to make you believe someone is home, but there's no one home. Only light bouncing off surfaces, only chemicals cascading in silence, only thoughts pretending they had a thinker. And yet, you're still listening, still convinced this realization belongs to you. So tell me, if you aren't the voice inside your head, then who the hell is listening to it? If this truth cuts deeper than comfort ever could, subscribe. This isn't just content, it's a descent, and the next one waiting in the dark might need this more than you do. Support the channel. Let's dismantle the illusion together. If this truth cuts deeper than comfort ever could, subscribe. This isn't just content, it's a descent, and the next one waiting in the dark might need this more than you do. Support the channel. Let's dismantle the illusion together. The self is a costume you were taught to be yourself, but no one told you what that self is. So you stitched it together from praise, punishments, glances, and gasps, until what you called identity was just a patchwork of expectations. You wear your personality like a well-fitted mask. But here's the cheat code. You didn't choose the mask, you inherited it, and it has already outlived you. Let's begin with the basics. You were born with a body, but not with a self. The concept of I, the persistent, unified you, is a story developed across years, shaped by environment, by trauma, by the need to be loved. You didn't discover your identity, you built it to survive. Psychologist Charles Horton coolly called it the looking-glass self. You see yourself not as you are, but as you imagine others see you. You perform not for yourself, but for the mirror of other people's approval. And that mirror reflects endlessly. You are an echo of imagined judgments, a reflection of reflections, a ghost chasing applause in a theater of masks. Take a child, dress her in blue, tell her she's brave, wild, reckless. Take another, dress her in pink, tell her she's delicate, sweet, beautiful. Now wait 10 years. Which one is more likely to climb trees? Which one is more likely to whisper instead of roar? The performance of identity begins long before language, before memory, before resistance is even possible. In 1979, psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan described self-determination theory, the idea that people need autonomy, competence, and relatedness to feel whole. But the world is designed to fracture these needs. You're rewarded not for authenticity, but for compliance. You're punished not for lies, but for deviation. So you learn to hide your hunger. You learn to mimic safety, and then one day you forget it was mimicry. That's the moment the mask fuses to the face. But it doesn't end there. Let's talk about role theory. Sociologist Irving Goffman described everyday life as a stage. You, the individual, are not a single entity. You are a series of roles performed in different contexts. You're one version at work, another with friends, another alone. You don't lie, you shift. But if every you is context dependent, then which one is real? The one with your boss, the one in the bathroom mirror, the one crying in traffic. Here's the cheat code. None of them. They're all costumes. And the more fluent you are in switching them, the more functional society says you are. Adaptable, social, professional. But that's not virtue. That's camouflage. Now think about memory again, how it props up the illusion of a consistent self. Every time you remember an event, your current emotions warp it. If you're ashamed today, your memory of childhood shifts accordingly. If you're angry now, you edit the past into betrayal. You don't remember your life. You reinterpret it again and again until it confirms the identity your ego is currently performing. That's not recollection. That's propaganda. Now, let's introduce a darker layer: trauma and identity fusion. A child abused repeatedly learns to internalize the pain, not just to endure it, but to justify it. I must deserve this. This is love. This is normal. And slowly, the abuse becomes foundational. Take away the pain, and the self collapses. You don't want healing. You want consistency, because chaos, even joyful chaos, is too unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity threatens the mask. You don't want to be free. You want to feel real. And if pain is the price, so be it. But pain is not identity, and neither is pleasure. Both are inputs, reactions, data. But the narrative you construct around them, that's the costume. So let's expose the final layer: the illusion of authenticity. Modern culture obsesses over being real. But what is real when the self is a script? Neurological studies show that even your preferences are malleable. You like what others like. You find faces more attractive if they resemble your own. You believe in causes your peers endorse. You follow trends not out of taste, but out of safety. If your beliefs, memories, emotions, and actions are all context-dependent, socially reinforced, and historically manufactured, then what exactly is left that belongs to you? When people say, "Just be yourself," they mean, perform the role that causes the least resistance. Stay consistent with our expectations. Don't evolve in ways we can't predict. So here's your second cheat code. The self is a curated hallucination, shaped by mirrors, carved by trauma, and held together by fear. You don't have a self. You have a costume. And you've been wearing it for so long, you've forgotten it was ever sewn. You thought the game was about finding who you are. But it's not. It's about remembering that you were made, stitched together by forces you never saw. So tell me, if you never chose the mask, why are you so afraid to take it off? The body keeps the algorithm. You think your body is just a vehicle, a tool, an obedient servant to your so-called mind. You think consciousness is in the brain, and the body is the flesh that follows. But the cheat code is this: your body is not following orders. Your body is issuing them. Let's strip away the illusion. You've been taught to believe you move because you choose to, that decisions originate in the mind, and the body obeys like a machine. But your biology doesn't work that way. The body acts, the mind explains, the nervous system fires, the brain justifies. Every heartbeat, every breath, every step is not commanded by will. It is dictated by millions of autonomic signals, happening faster than your awareness can keep up. And they don't just control your movement, they control your thoughts. Consider this: your gut, yes, the one you think only digests food, has over 100 million neurons. That's more than the spinal cord. It's called the enteric nervous system, and it communicates constantly with your brain via the vagus nerve. Over 90% of this communication is from the gut to the brain, not the other way around. You don't eat because your mind decides you're hungry. Your mind becomes hungry because your gut decides it's time. Hormones like ghrelin and leptin tell your brain what to want. Neurotransmitters like serotonin, most of which is produced in the gut, regulate your mood before your brain even catches up. Your cravings, your moods, your obsessions, they're not psychological, they're physiological. Algorithms. Old primal loops, hijacking your identity and calling themselves desire. You're not in control. You're informed of decisions your body already made. Now, let's talk about trauma, not as memory, but as code written into your nervous system. When you experience something life-threatening, your body doesn't just react in the moment. It learns, it reads, it encodes the fear into your flesh. Your heart rate increases when you see shadows. Your skin tightens at the sound of yelling. You flinch when someone raises a hand, even if no harm is meant. You call it overreacting. The body calls it pattern recognition. It has memorized pain like a firewall memorizes threats. The file cannot be deleted, only overridden with years of safety that rarely come. In 1994, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk wrote, "The body keeps the score." But what he didn't say is this: the body keeps the score, and it never forgets who the opponent was. This is why people sabotage love, why calmness makes you anxious, why stillness feels unsafe. Because your body has been trained by years of pattern repetition that chaos is normal, that adrenaline is safety, that collapse is predictable, and the body doesn't crave happiness. It craves familiarity, even if the familiarity is violence. You think you're choosing your relationships, your career, your moods. You're not. Your nervous system is choosing what feels survivable. You feel drawn to certain people, but often what you're drawn to is what fits your algorithm. The emotionally distant partner, the unstable friend, the high-pressure job, the constant drama, not because you want pain, but because pain is what your body recognizes. It's like a corrupted software script. If X equals calm, then trigger fear. If X equals chaos, then release dopamine. If X equals unfamiliar, then attack. If X equals predictable harm, then relax. This is how abuse gets encoded into preference, how survival becomes a lifestyle, how trauma becomes identity. You're not broken. You're perfectly functional for an environment you no longer live in, but your body doesn't know that. It only knows the past. It only runs the script. Now let's talk about posture, breath, stillness, do. You know what happens when you take a deep breath and unclench your jaw. Your body tries to fight it, because parasympathetic states, rest, digest, surrender, feel unsafe to a body that's been at war. This is why meditation feels unbearable to some people. Not because it's hard, but because peace feels alien. The moment you slow down, the system panics, and your brain makes up a reason. I'm wasting time. I'm not doing it right. I'm just not the type to meditate. But the truth is, your nervous system is rejecting stillness. Because stillness is a foreign language your body was never taught. Let's talk about shame. Shame is not an emotion. Shame is an alarm system triggered by the perception of social rejection. It lights up the same parts of your brain as physical pain. It's a survival mechanism, because to your ancient biology, social exclusion meant death. So when you speak in a group and your voice shakes, that's not nervousness. That's limbic hijack, your brainstem, firing off survival protocols to keep you from being ostracized. And when you replay an embarrassing moment from 5 years ago, cringing, with fresh pain, that's not memory. That's your nervous system simulating danger, keeping the social threat alive, so you don't fail again. You think you're anxious because your life is chaotic, but sometimes you're anxious because your nervous system is addicted to vigilance. It doesn't care that your situation changed. It only cares that once you weren't safe. Now tell me, how do you override a system that interprets peace as risk? The truth is, you don't. You can't logic your way out of a biological script. You can't affirm away your reflexes. Your body is running an operating system older than civilization. You didn't write it. You can't access the source code. You can only witness the symptoms and guess at the language you thought you were living. But you're reacting again and again. Two signals that began before thought was born. So here's the third cheat code. Your body is not your servant. It is your jailer. It defines the thoughts you can think, the emotions you can tolerate, the intimacy you can allow, the peace you can survive. You've mistaken the cage for the creature. So tell me, if the algorithm in your body is older than your mind, then what part of you was ever really free? History is an engineered dream. You believe in history because you were handed a timeline, dates, names, events, a straight line from the past to the present, as if time ever moved that way. But here's the cheat code. History is not what happened. History is what was permitted to be remembered. And it was not written by the victors. It was written by the survivors, the ones who learned how to narrate without bleeding. Let's begin with a simple paradox. You have no memory of your great-grandparents' faces, no recollection of the food they ate, the pain they carried, the gods they feared, and yet you walk on the bones of their decisions. You move through architecture they never saw, obey laws they never voted for, believe myths they never approved, all in the name of progress. History is not cumulative. It is selective amnesia, passed off as knowledge. Every civilization is a curated forgetting, a burning of libraries, a silencing of tongues. Think of the Library of Alexandria, once the greatest collection of human knowledge, destroyed in phases by conquerors, politics, and flames. What was lost? We'll never know, because that's what makes history terrifying. It cannot be verified. It can only be told. Every textbook is an act of storytelling, and all stories serve the agenda of the moment. The Council of Nicaea in 3 AD didn't just define Christian doctrine, it chose which gospels to erase. Whole visions of faith gone, not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient. And so, the first sin of history was omission. Let's look at something more recent. In 1953, the CIA launched Operation Ajax, a covert operation to overthrow Iran's democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. Why? Because he tried to nationalize oil. This coup shaped modern Middle Eastern geopolitics. It birthed decades of anti-Western resentment. It helped fuel revolutions, dictatorships, terrorism. But was it in your high school history book? Was it in your university curriculum? Doubtful, because history is not what happened. It's what gets funded. Who writes the curriculum? Who owns the printing press? Who sponsors the museum? Here's a truth. What you believe to be the story of us was edited by institutions with names you will never know and motives you will never be taught. Think of the doctrine of discovery, a 15th century papal decree that gave European Christians the right to claim land uninhabited by Christians, regardless of indigenous presence. This decree was the legal and moral foundation for colonial genocide, used even in modern U.S. Supreme Court decisions. Do you know that? Name? Did you learn that phrase? Or did you learn manifest destiny? Did you learn civilizing mission? Did you learn the spread of democracy? This is not a conspiracy. This is curriculum. The lie is not hidden. The lie is formatted. Now let's talk about time. You think time is linear because your calendar says so. But what if time is just a narrative structure? A way to order chaos into coherence. In Buddhist cosmology, time is circular. In Mayan tradition, time is layered. In modern physics, time is relative, distorted by gravity, velocity, observation. So what makes your version of time true? What makes 1776 more real than 10,000 BC? What makes the Renaissance more important than the centuries of African empires it erased? Here's the cheat. Time was colonized, and with it, memory. Let's look at maps, those trusted windows into geography. The Mercator projection, still used. In schools today, grossly enlarges Europe and North America, while shrinking Africa and South America. It's not an accident. It's not aesthetics. It's cartographic propaganda, reinforcing psychological dominance by distorting spatial truth. You think maps tell you where you are, but they tell you who is important. Now consider language, another weaponized artifact of history. You speak English not because it is superior, but because it was enforced, through war, through trade, through erasure. Linguist Claude Haggage notes that one language dies every 2 weeks. Every time it happens, an entire cosmic framework, a unique way of sensing, describing, and interpreting reality is lost forever. When a language dies, a world dies, and yet history treats this as progress, as unification, as globalization, because the history, you know, is optimized for empire. It's designed to produce obedience, not awareness. And now we come to the final veil. Memory itself is not history. Your brain doesn't store the past. It replays fragments shaped by trauma, culture, and repetition. You remember 9/11s in slow motion, but forget the millions who died silently in Iraq and Afghanistan. You remember Hitler, but not King Leopold II, who slaughtered 10 million Congolese. You remember the Holocaust, but not the Bengal famine, engineered by Winston Churchill's policies. The world doesn't hide these things. It just doesn't repeat them, because repetition is reality. History is not just what is preserved. It is what is rehearsed. That's why statues matter. That's why holidays matter. That's why names go on buildings. Because repetition becomes reverence, and reverence becomes truth. But if truth is just what's repeated, then what else have you worshipped that was never real? So here's the fourth cheat code. History is not the past. History is the power to decide which lies get called truth. You think you know where you came from, but you only know what survived the censorship. You think your nation is a legacy, but it's a well-branded narrative. You think your ancestors are proud, but the ones who resisted were never allowed to write you letters. So tell me, if everything you know about the past was curated, then who are you, really, when the story collapses? Truth is a popularity contest. You think the truth wins because it's true. You think facts rise to the top like cream in milk. You think logic, evidence, and reason are the engines of civilization. But here's the cheat code. Truth doesn't rise, it trends. And what trends can be bought? Let's dismantle the myth of the truth teller. You were taught to admire Galileo, a lone genius, punished by the church for speaking the truth. But you were not told how many scientists didn't make it into your textbooks. You weren't told how many were silenced, erased, or ignored because their truths didn't serve power. Science is not a temple. It is a battleground. And truth is the currency, not the goal. Let's begin with a simple experiment. In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted the now famous conformity experiments. Subjects were asked to match line lengths. The correct answer was obvious. But when Confederates in the group deliberately gave the wrong answer, 37% of participants conformed, knowingly stating falsehoods just to align with the crowd. They didn't lack intelligence. They lacked permission to be right. And that's the rule. People don't believe what's true. They believe what's safe to believe. Let's step into the digital age. On social media, ideas spread not by merit, but by the more outrageous, emotional, or shareable a claim is, the more attention it receives, regardless of accuracy. This is called information cascade, a process where the popularity of an idea becomes its validation. You don't share because it's true. You share because others shared it. And soon, belief becomes momentum. That's how conspiracy theories grow. That's how misinformation becomes dogma. That's how popularity fuses with truth in the human brain. It's not a glitch. It's cognitive economics. Your brain is energy efficient. It doesn't process every idea equally. It uses shortcuts, heuristics. One of the most powerful, the availability heuristic. If you've heard something often, it must be true. So what's repeated becomes familiar. What's familiar becomes safe. And what's safe becomes sacred. Now think of peer review, the gold standard of academic credibility. Peer review isn't neutral. It's a gatekeeping ritual. Journals have biases. Editors have biases. Funding bodies have biases. If your data doesn't support the dominant narrative, your paper doesn't get published. If your conclusions threaten a corporate sponsor, your grant disappears. And so, entire domains of knowledge are shaped not by reality, but by narrative compliance. You think the consensus is truth, but the consensus is often a survival strategy. Let's talk about corporate truth. Coca-Cola once paid millions to fund studies claiming exercise matters more than diet for obesity. Big Tobacco funded research denying the link between smoking and cancer for decades. Oil companies buried evidence of climate change while promoting denial campaigns. these weren't mistakes. They were investments in manufacturing consensus. You don't need to prove something is true. You only need to make doubt louder than fact. If truth is a signal, then noise is the weapon, and whoever owns the loudest microphone wins. Let's move into your personal life. Ever argued with someone who just knew they were right? Ever felt logic fail when faced with certainty? That's not irrationality. That's ego protection. The brain treats beliefs like property. Attacking someone's belief system feels neurologically like attacking their home. MRI studies show that when core beliefs are challenged, the brain lights up in the amygdala, the same region activated during physical threat. In other words, facts feel like violence. So people don't argue to seek truth. They argue to defend identity. And in the end, the most comforting belief usually wins. Not the most accurate, not the most consistent, just the one that hurts the least. So, how does truth survive? It doesn't. It mutates. When Galileo looked through a telescope, he saw moons orbiting Jupiter, not Earth. He didn't discover truth. He saw differently than others, and for that he was punished. Because truth isn't rewarded for accuracy, it's rewarded for utility. If your truth disrupts power, it dies. If your truth protects power, it spreads. Now let's consider Plato's allegory of the cave. Prisoners watch shadows on the wall and call it reality. One escapes, sees the light, returns to tell the others. And what do? They don't thank him, they kill him. Because truth doesn't just liberate, it destabilizes. It shatters the psychic scaffolding people build to survive. And so the majority doesn't chase truth. They chase stability, predictability, consensus, and truth becomes what most people can emotionally tolerate. You thought the internet would democratize information, but it weaponized confirmation bias. You thought access to knowledge would liberate the mind, but it fed the algorithm. Now truth bends to engagement metrics. Now belief is shaped by likes, retweets, and search optimization. You think you're thinking, but you're curating. You're optimizing your identity for palatable exposure. So here's the fifth cheat code. Truth is not a fact. It is a consensus hallucination shaped by trauma, algorithms, fear, and influence. The crowd doesn't seek truth. The crowd seeks comfort, and comfort wears the mask of certainty. So tell me, if truth is chosen by applause, how would you ever know if the truth is screaming with its mouth covered? Love is an evolutionary hoax. You think love is sacred, a soul connection, a divine alignment of hearts across time. You think it gives your life meaning, but here's the cheat code. Love is not a miracle. It's a survival mechanism wrapped in poetry. Let's start with the lie you swallowed whole, that love is about you, that it's about compatibility, destiny, chemistry, fulfillment, that it's rare, that it's magical, that it's proof of your worth. But evolution didn't design love for fulfillment. It designed love for utility, for gene propagation and resource stability. Love is not the point of life, it is the bait. Let's dissect the machinery biologically. Romantic love is driven by a cocktail of chemicals: dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin, serotonin, adrenaline. These aren't emotions. They're neurochemical levers, ancient tools your body uses to ensure you bond, breed, and remain attached long enough to protect the offspring. Dopamine makes you crave, oxytocin makes you trust, vasopressin makes you stay, serotonin makes you obsess. Adrenaline makes you mistake anxiety for passion. Put them together, and what do you get? Euphoria, obsession, possessiveness, panic at loss, the myth of the one. But the chemistry isn't personal. It isn't tailored. It's not evidence of cosmic alignment. It's reproductive strategy. Still think you're in love? Or are you just high? Now, let's talk about mate selection. What you call attraction. You think you're choosing partners based on shared values, mutual respect, vibes. But decades of psychological research say otherwise. You're drawn to facial symmetry, to pheromones that suggest genetic diversity, to hip-to-waist ratios and jawline angles that predict hormonal fertility, to body odors that indicate immune system compatibility. These preferences are not ethical, not conscious, not noble. They are biological algorithms optimized for reproductive fitness. You're not falling in love. You're selecting a co-host for your DNA. But let's go deeper. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby, reveals that the way you love as an adult is deeply shaped by how you were treated as a child. If your caregivers were responsive, you likely formed a secure attachment style. If they were neglectful, inconsistent, or abusive, you likely developed avoidant, anxious, or disorganized styles. And here's the kicker. You will unconsciously seek out partners who mirror those early dynamics. Why? Because your nervous system equates familiarity with safety, even if familiarity means pain. You're not looking for love. You're looking for what you already survived. You call it a type. You call it chemistry. But what you're really feeling is a trauma. Echo. That's why the people who feel most right often do the most damage. Because your body isn't drawn to kindness. It's drawn to recognizable chaos. Still think love is about choice. Let's talk about limerence, the obsessive, euphoric phase of early romantic attraction, coined by psychologist Dorothy Tenoff. Limerence is a temporary madness, intrusive thoughts, idealization, emotional dependency. It lasts 6 to 24 months. Then it dies. Not because you did something wrong, but because the brain cannot sustain romantic obsession forever. It would interfere with productivity, with food gathering, with war. Fades by design. And what do people do when limerence fades? They panic, they cheat, they chase the high again, thinking something must be broken. But nothing is broken. You were simply used by your own biology, and when the genes were secure, it let you go. Now consider social constructs. You think love leads to marriage, but historically, marriage was never about love. It was about property, bloodlines, inheritance, alliances. Love marriage is a modern invention, barely 200 years old, and only common in a few cultures. Even today, most marriages globally are arranged, not because people lack freedom, but because love is seen as an unstable foundation for lifelong contracts. And yet you've been told that if love fails, you are the failure. You blame yourself for biology's expiration date, for capitalism's unsustainable expectations, for trauma's inevitable friction. You call it heartbreak, but it was always decay. Let's bring in economics. In 2016, psychologists from the University of Utah found that romantic ideals in media, soulmates, perfect matches, happily ever afters, lead to higher rates of dissatisfaction and divorce. Why? Because expectations kill relationships faster than betrayal. Because the fantasy of eternal passion is biologically impossible. You were sold a defective blueprint, one that requires you to violate your evolutionary wiring to maintain a performance of forever. And then you wonder why you're miserable. Here's the final layer. Love is not about the other person. Love is about how they make you feel about yourself, how their attention validates your story, how their eyes confirm your worth, how their chaos matches your patterns. You don't love them. You love the version of you that exists in their gaze, which is why when they leave or change, you feel like you're dying, because the self you were in their presence evaporates, and you have no idea who you are without it. So here's the sixth cheat code. Love is not truth. Love is leverage. It leverages biology to bond you. It leverages trauma to trap you. It leverages fantasy to keep you consuming. It is not sacred. It is not eternal. It is a drug, a ritual, a feedback loop designed to reward reproduction and punish deviation. You didn't choose to love. You were programmed to. So tell me, if love is just the scent of your biology burning, why does the smoke still feel holy? Freedom is a marketing slogan. You think you're free because no one's holding a gun to your head, because you vote, because you shop, because you swipe left instead of right. You think choice means liberty, but here's the cheat code. Freedom isn't the absence of chains, it's the illusion of authorship inside a pre-written script. Let's begin with the most popular lie of modern life. You are in control. You choose what to wear, what to eat, who to love, what to believe. But zoom out. Who built the menu? Your choices are predetermined by culture, class, conditioning, and algorithms. You can't want what you've never seen. You can't choose what doesn't exist. And so you are free to pick from the options you were given. Let's talk about capitalist freedom, the religion of modern society. The market tells you, work hard, buy what you love, chase your dream. But beneath the slogans is a trap. You must work to earn. You must earn to survive. You must consume to feel valuable. So where is the freedom? In wage labor, you sell your time, the one thing you can never replenish. Your waking hours are monetized. Your attention is commodified. Your desires are curated by advertising engines that know your cravings before you do. A 2015 study by Harvard Business School found that 72% of Americans felt stuck in jobs they hated, yet they stayed. Why? Because freedom without resources is just exhaustion with options. Now look at social freedom. You're told you can say anything. That speech is free. But try saying the wrong thing in the wrong room. Try challenging the sacred myths of your tribe. Try expressing doubt, complexity, nuance. You'll be punished, not always by the state, but by the mob, by silence, by exile, by algorithms that shadow ban dissent. So speech is free until it threatens the comfort of the crowd. Now examine your digital freedom. You scroll endlessly, believing you're choosing what to see. But algorithms serve you content based on emotional response, especially outrage. You're not being informed. You're being conditioned to consume more, fear more, divide more. And the worst part, you call this connection. You call this freedom of expression. But what you're really doing is offering your dopamine to machines designed to harvest it. Still think you're free. Let's get more personal. Try doing nothing for an hour. No phone, no music, no work, no stimulation. Most people can't last 10 minutes because the modern mind is allergic to stillness. Why? Because stillness is where your real prison surfaces. The shame, the grief, the emptiness you've been patching over with noise and novelty. You chase freedom because you're running from yourself. You travel. You upgrade. You reinvent. But the same ghosts follow you into every room Because the bars aren't around you, they're inside you. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And modern freedom, it's engineered to keep you distracted from your soul at all costs. Let's break down the myth of choice. You think the ability to choose between 10 brands of toothpaste is freedom, but when all 10 are owned by the same 3 corporations, what are you really choosing? Packaging, scent, illusion. You think freedom means self-expression, but when your style is based on trends you didn't start, and your language is shaped by memes you didn't create, and your opinions mirror the influences you follow, what part of you is actually choosing? You've been handed a sandbox and told it's the world. A cage with Wi-Fi and espresso machines. A dream that loops forever as long as you don't wake up. Now, look at political freedom. You're told to vote, but your candidates are pre-selected, your choices filtered by billion-dollar campaigns, lobbyists, and corporate media. You pick the lesser evil. You celebrate compromise. You vote and feel virtuous. But voting is not power. Voting is participating in the performance of power. You're not steering the ship. You're choosing the color of the curtains as it sails into the storm. Still, think you're free. Even in your private thoughts, you are not untouched. You've inherited frameworks for interpreting your feelings, guilt, pride, shame, love, from your culture, your family, your ideology. You didn't invent your moral compass. It was handed to you in lullabies and punishments. You don't think freely. You think within boundaries. And the moment you begin to step outside, the alarms sound. Don't be selfish. Don't be crazy. Don't question everything. But why not? Because freedom is dangerous not to you, but to the structure that feeds on your obedience. You were never taught how to be free. You were taught how to feel free while being productive, docile, predictable. So here's the 7th cheat code. Freedom is the most effective form of control, because people will police themselves if they believe they're free. No chains, just preferences, just dreams that fit inside prison walls. You don't fight the system, you download its updates. So tell me, if every version of your freedom was pre-approved, can you really say you've ever made a choice? Meaning is a side effect of pain. You think life has meaning because you feel it in sunsets, in poetry, in your child's laughter. You think suffering leads to wisdom. You think your pain has purpose, and you hold on to that belief like a raft in a storm. But here's the cheat code. Meaning doesn't exist before pain. It's built to survive it. Let's start with the core illusion that the universe cares. It doesn't. There is no celestial ledger recording your heartbreak, no bank account storing your effort, no narrative arc ensuring justice, redemption, or growth. The universe is indifferent. It spins, it expands, it forgets. And yet, when you suffer, when your lover leaves, when the diagnosis arrives, when death calls someone you love, you look for patterns, you whisper, why? And the mind cannot tolerate silence, so it invents. You assign meaning to events after they happen, retroactively stitching suffering into significance. My heartbreak taught me boundaries. My illness made me grateful. My pain gave me purpose. But this is psychological backfilling, the mind's attempt to impose order on chaos, a narrative overlay, a coping mechanism. It's not wrong. It's not shameful. But it's not truth. Let's talk about Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He observed that those who found purpose, even in hell, were more likely to survive. But Frankl didn't say the suffering had meaning. He said the mind creates it to endure. There's a difference. The meaning didn't come from the camps. It came from the desperation not to be consumed by despair. Meaning isn't discovered. It's manufactured by the psyche under duress. Now, let's examine terror management theory, a psychological framework developed in the 1980s. It proposes that most human behavior is driven by the fear of death. To buffer this terror, we create systems of symbolic immortality, religion, legacy, nation, art, children. We say we live for love, for beauty, for truth, but beneath it all is the primal whisper, I don't want to vanish. So meaning becomes a defense mechanism, a shield against oblivion. It's not evidence of value, it's evidence of fear. Let's go deeper. Have you ever wondered why tragedy makes you feel awake? Why suffering carves a depth into you that joy never could? It's not spiritual, it's neurological. Pain heightens awareness. It disrupts routine. It demands attention. In evolutionary terms, pain signals danger, and danger requires learning. So the brain enters hyperfocus, pattern-seeking mode, and whatever you latch onto in that moment, a song, a sentence, a symbol, becomes fused with the event. You remember the date, the weather, the smell, and you build stories around it. Stories that make the pain bearable. My miscarriage helped me grow. My father's death taught me how to live. My breakdown led me to my calling. But the pain didn't come to teach. It came because life is statistical cruelty, and you made meaning to survive the randomness. Now let's talk about trauma. Trauma doesn't just wound, it splits. It creates a before and after, a tear in your timeline that demands stitching. And the stitches are made of story. People don't need healing. They need coherence, a way to explain what happened, to reintegrate the shattered self. And so meaning is born, not from truth, but from necessity. You say, I went through that because I was strong, because the alternative, I suffered. For nothing is unbearable. But strength isn't forged by suffering. It's forged by what you had to become to keep breathing. And sometimes, meaning is just the scaffolding around grief. Now let's challenge the nobility of pain. We romanticize struggle. We say it builds character. We say the darkest nights lead to the brightest dawns. But suffering doesn't always enlighten. Sometimes it breaks. Ask the addict on the street, the child soldier, the prisoner who never came back. Some pain doesn't create meaning. It erases it. And yet you never hear those stories, because they don't sell, because they don't fit the redemption arc we crave. We need pain to be useful, otherwise it threatens our entire worldview, so we commodify it, package it into TED Talks, brand it as growth, sell it as spiritual capital. Turn your wounds into wisdom. Everything happens for a reason. The universe gives its toughest battles to its strongest soldiers. But this is trauma porn, and it makes survival a performance. You think you're healing, but you're just making the story palatable to others, because raw pain is too much. Because meaningless suffering is socially contagious. So we wrap our wounds in language, not to share truth, but to remain acceptable. Now look at religion. Every religion offers a story for suffering, a narrative for injustice, a framework for loss. And that's why religion survives, not because it's true, but because it gives pain structure. It says, this isn't random, this is sacred, this will make sense later. But what if it doesn't? What if there is no later? Here's the cheat code. Meaning is not found. It is fabricated in the smoldering ruins of what you couldn't control. It is the scar, not the wound, the echo, not the scream, and it is necessary. But it is not proof of purpose. You are not living a story. You are writing one on the fly, desperate for it to justify the bleeding. So tell me, if pain creates meaning just to stay alive, then is meaning anything more than anesthetic with a name? Memory is a liar that looks like you. You trust your memories. You believe your past is a library you can visit at will, facts, feelings, chronology, identity. You think what you remember is what happened, but here's the cheat code: memory isn't storage, it's imagination with a trauma filter. Let's begin with the myth that memory is passive, that it records, that it waits for you. It doesn't. Memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Every time you recall a moment, you don't retrieve it, you rebuild it. And in the rebuilding, your emotions, biases, current mood, and even language reshape it. You're not accessing history, you're editing it. Now consider this. Your earliest memory likely isn't your own. It's an image reconstructed from stories, photographs, home videos, repackaged as experience. You don't remember being born. You don't remember most of your first years. Why? Because the part of your brain responsible for long-term explicit memory, the hippocampus, wasn't fully developed. But your brain still recorded feelings, sensations, tones. It just didn't give them words. So the foundation of your identity is wordless emotion, raw affect, fused to your nervous system with no context. This is why a smell can make you cry, why a tone of voice can trigger panic, why some places feel cursed, and you don't know why. Your body remembers what your mind was too young to name. Let's talk about false memories. In 1995, psychologist Elizabeth Loftus conducted an experiment where participants were told falsely that they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child. After some suggestion and social reinforcement, 25% of them remembered the event in detail. They described the store, the fear, the person who helped them. None of it happened. This isn't a rare glitch. It's a feature of memory. You're not a historian. You're a storyteller, under pressure, constantly rewriting your past to match your present beliefs. This is called cognitive dissonance reduction. If you believe you're a good person, your brain will edit memories that contradict that. You'll forget the moments you were cruel. You'll revise your intent. You'll shift the blame, not out of malice, but out of psychic necessity. You can't survive a fractured self-image, so the past is bent to preserve the ego. Still think. You remember what really happened. Let's go deeper. Memory is state-dependent. When you're angry, you recall other times you were angry. When you're sad, you recall betrayals. When you're loved, you romanticize past kindness. This isn't a trick. It's neural filtering. Your brain pulls memories that match your current emotional frequency, which means you don't remember objectively. You remember what matches your mood, what confirms your identity, what justifies your pain. Memory isn't history. It's emotional architecture. Now think about trauma. Trauma doesn't just create sharp, unforgettable moments. It also erases many. Trauma survivors experience dissociative amnesia. Entire blocks of time vanish, unprocessed. This isn't failure, it's defense. The mind protects itself by the memory still exists in the body, in triggers, in dreams, but not in narrative form. And what the mind can't narrate, it can't integrate. So the person lives with a ghost, a haunting without a story. And society says, you're overreacting. That was a long time ago. Why can't you move on? because you can't move on from a memory you don't know you have. Let's talk about nostalgia. That golden-hued lie you whisper to yourself when the present burns. You think the past was better, safer, simpler, but nostalgia is a survival bias. The brain edits out pain. It highlights what was stable. It bathes the unbearable in soft light. It's not truth, it's anesthesia. And yet people build their entire identities on these lies. The good old days, back when I was happy, before everything changed. But the good old days were never that good. You were just less conscious of the cost. Let's break the final illusion. You think memory belongs to you, but your memories can be edited by others. The stories your family tells, the movies you watch, the ideologies you absorb, all of them can implant scenes into your mind, scenes you'd swear are real, in cults, in propaganda states, in childhoods soaked in gaslighting. Entire identities are implanted, not formed. You're told what happened, how it felt, who was wrong, who was right, and over time, the internal line between experience and inheritance blurs. You become the voice that trained you. So here's the 9th cheat code. Memory is not a mirror. It is a script, rewritten by fear, altered by mood, shaped by power. You don't remember your life. You remember a version of your life that your psyche could survive. And the most dangerous thing, that version feels true. So tell me, if the self you believe in is based on a story told by a liar with your voice, what else have you misremembered into certainty? Identity is a patch made of masks. Think there is a you beneath the noise, a true self, an essence, a core that remains untouched by time, untouched by fear. You think if you just peel away the layers, the shame, the ego, the trauma, you'll find your original face. But here's the cheat code. There is no original face. There are only masks, stacked, stitched, and scared of falling off. Let's begin with the fantasy that beneath the roles you perform, daughter, husband, artist, friend, there's a pure, authentic identity waiting to be found. A soul, a blueprint, a final version of you. But the self isn't discovered. It's assembled from fragments, from performances, from projections and reactions and what you had to become to be loved. Psychologist Carl Rogers called it the real self versus the ideal self. But he never promised that either existed independently. They're constructs, tools for comparison, weapons of guilt, escape hatches for those afraid of emptiness, because to admit that identity is fluid feels like death. Now let's bring in George Herbert Mead, the philosopher who defined identity as the internalization of others' reactions. You see yourself not through your own eyes, but through the eyes you imagine are watching. You are a performance curated for an audience you can't name, and yet you call it authenticity, still think you're real. Consider the concept of the persona as defined by Carl Jung. The persona is not a lie, it's a necessary mask. The interface between the chaotic inner world and the orderly social realm. But when the persona becomes fused with the self, you forget it's a mask. You defend it, you bleed for it, you die 1,000 times just to maintain its illusion. You don't protect yourself, you protect the costume. Let's take a more brutal lens, the theory of symbolic interactionism. Every interaction is a negotiation of meaning. You adapt, reshape, bend, mirror, just to stay legible. The moment you stop performing, people recoil. Because they weren't interacting with you, They were interacting with the role you've always played. And when the role collapses, so does the relationship. Now think of imposter syndrome, that creeping feeling that you're faking it, that you don't belong, that you're moments away from being found out. But what if imposter syndrome isn't a malfunction? What if it's honesty peeking through the cracks? What if deep down you know there is no solid self, just layers of learned behavior dressed up as truth? And yet society punishes the unmasked, the shapeshifter, the ambiguous, the too little, not dash enough. We exalt authenticity, but only when it's digestible. We cheer vulnerability, but only when it follows the script. You're allowed to be real, as long as it doesn't make anyone uncomfortable, so you keep tailoring your mask, smiling through the shame, performing confidence, mimicking intimacy, and the longer you wear it, the more you forget there was ever a face underneath. Now, let's talk about trauma, the master sculptor of identity. You didn't become who you are because of dreams. You became who you are because of adaptive necessity. You were loud, so they punished you. Now you're quiet. You were needy, so they mocked you. Now you're distant. You were trusting, so they betrayed you. Now you're strategic. You call this growth. You call this personality. But it's armor. You are a war memoir written in muscle tension and coping mechanisms, and you mistake your scars for your signature. Let's bring in Goffman's presentation of self in everyday life. He said, life is theater. You are an actor. Your identity is a costume adapted for the stage you're on. Different roles, different masks, same hollow backstage. You say you're not yourself around certain people, but what if there is no fixed self to return to? What if you're always adapting, always curating, always contorting just enough to be accepted? Now look at memory. Again, you recall your past, not as it was, but as who you are now needs it to be. You revise, you justify, you mythologize. And so your identity isn't stable. It's narrative maintenance. Each day, you wake up and remember who you were, and then edit the self to fit today's scene. It's not delusion, it's self-preservation. Now, consider consumer identity. You define yourself by what you buy, what you wear, what you reject. You say, I'm vegan, I'm a minimalist, I'm a Scorpio, I'm a gym rat, I'm an INFJ. These aren't identities. They're filters, tools for social sorting, for self-legibility, because if you don't label yourself, you risk being undefined. And in a world that demands categorization, being undefined is the same as being invisible. But every label limits you. Every I am becomes a prison. Every this is who I am is a Puritan script. You're now too scared to deviate from . So here's the 10th cheat code. Identity is not your essence. It's your survival strategy. It is the mask you stitched in the dark, when you were too young to know you were hiding. It is the performance you've mistaken for presence. The armor you call personality. You think there's a real you waiting to be uncovered. But what if there's only an ever-changing mask, and the fear that if you ever remove it, no one, including you, will recognize what's left? So tell me, if every version of you is context, costume, and compromise, who is wearing the mask when no one's watching? Language is a spell you forgot you were under. You speak without hesitation. You name things. You describe thoughts. You wrap feelings in words and call that communication. You believe that language reveals the truth. But here's the cheat code. Language doesn't reveal reality. It replaces it. Let's begin with the first betrayal. The moment you learned to name the world, a tree, a chair, a mother, you didn't discover those things. You were told what to call them. And the moment you accepted the word, you lost the rawness of the thing. You stopped seeing the sway, the wood, the presence, and started seeing only the label. This is what philosopher Alan Watts called the menu, not the meal. Language is a map. But the problem is, you think it's the territory. You believe naming something gives you control over it. You think saying grief, love, hope captures the thing itself. But these are not truths. They're containers, pre-built structures that limit what you're allowed to feel, how you're allowed to express it, and what others will accept as valid. You don't speak your emotions. You compress them into socially agreed-upon spells. You trade infinite feeling for finite vocabulary. Now consider this. Before you had the word sad, what did sadness feel like? Vast, foreign, untranslatable. But once you learned the word, you boxed the feeling. You narrowed its range. You started to perform sadness, not just feel it. You started to say, I'm sad. And with that, you told your nervous system what script to follow: the tears, the sigh, the collapse. But what if the word sad wasn't enough? What if your grief was not sadness, but hollowness, nausea, weight, heat, memory, silence? Language didn't free you. It amputated your experience for the sake of efficiency. Now, think of the words we use to define people: man, woman, friend, enemy, crazy, normal, success, failure. These words carry weight. Expectations, rules. You don't hear the word, you hear the culture behind it. And so a single word can imprison a life. A girl is told she is emotional. A boy is told he is weak. A mother is called cold. A worker is labeled lazy. And those words don't describe. They dictate. They create a frame, and everything that doesn't fit gets cropped out. You think you speak language, but language speaks you. You inherited every word you use, and with them you inherited biases, borders, blind spots. In Hopi there is no word for time the way English defines it. In Pirahu, a remote Amazonian language, there are no fixed words for numbers or past events. These aren't just linguistic quirks. They are cognitive worlds, different realities, because the language you use doesn't just reflect thought, it limits it. This is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The idea that the structure of a language shapes the speaker's perception of the world. So if your language has no word for peace, can you truly experience it? If your language only frames gender in binaries, can you see anything outside of it? Still think words are just tools. Let's talk about legal language. Your rights, your contracts, your debts, all written in spells you don't understand. By agreeing to these terms, hereby waive, binding arbitration. The law is not designed for clarity. It's designed for control through confusion. You sign your name and you give your freedom to a language that pretends to protect it. Language becomes a labyrinth, and the only people who know the exits are the ones who built it. Now think about spiritual language: heaven, hell, sin, salvation. These are not descriptions. They are architectures of behavior. When you internalize the word sin, you start policing your thoughts long before action arises. When you say blessed, you start measuring life through approval, not presence. Religious language doesn't just name the divine, it controls the doorway to it. And in politics, freedom, democracy, patriot, terrorist, these are not objective terms. They are emotional triggers, designed to seduce, inflame, or erase. A rebel becomes a freedom fighter, becomes a terrorist, depending on who controls the headline. A protest becomes a riot, becomes a threat, depending on whose language frames the footage. Words are not neutral. They are weapons with syntax. Now think of the language in your own head. You say, I'm worthless. I always screw up. I can't change. Where did those sentences come from? A parent, a teacher, a stranger, a memory, and yet you repeat them day after day as if they were yours. Language is recursive. What you say becomes what you feel. What you feel becomes what you believe. What you believe becomes your reality. So here's the 11th cheat code. Language is not a mirror, it's a spell, and you are under it. Every word you use is a rope that either pulls you deeper into illusion or ties you to a version of yourself you no longer want to be. You didn't choose your words. They were woven into you before you had a choice. So tell me, if language is the software that shapes your world, how would you know if you've never seen the code? Reality is a consensus hallucination. You think reality is stable, that it's the same for everyone, that what you see is what is. But here's the cheat code. Reality isn't real. It's negotiated. You don't perceive the world as it is. You perceive it through a filter, sensory, cognitive, cultural, emotional. And the moment you were born, that filter started narrowing. Let's start with your senses. You can only hear between 20 Hz and 20,000 Hz. You can only see a tiny sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, visible light. There are colors you'll never see, sounds you'll never hear, textures you'll never feel, worlds hidden in the spaces between what your flesh can detect. Reality is not what's there. Reality is what you can survive noticing. Now look at perception. Your eyes don't see. Your brain constructs a model based on prior experience, prediction, and expectation. It fills in gaps. It ignores contradictions. It smooths the chaos into consistency. This is called predictive coding. Your brain constantly guesses what's happening, then adjusts those guesses based on incoming data. But here's the glitch. If the data contradicts the guess too much, your brain will ignore the data. You see what you expect to see, not what's there. That's not objectivity. That's a hallucination with rules. Now add cultural reality. What you believe to be real is shaped by language, religion, norms, and symbols. An omen in one culture is a coincidence in another. A god in one tribe is a myth in another. A diagnosis in one country is a spiritual awakening in another. You say schizophrenia. Someone else says shamanism. You say anxiety. Someone else says spiritual sensitivity. The reality you live in isn't global. It's local to your paradigm. And if your paradigm shifts, so does your entire definition of sanity. Let's talk about placebo. A sugar pill has no chemical power. But if you believe it will heal you, your brain releases endorphins, dopamine, even initiates cellular repair. Placebo surgeries, where no real procedure is done, have shown real recovery in trials. What does that mean? That belief isn't a response to reality. Belief creates reality in your body. Now imagine what belief does to your mind. If you believe the world is dangerous, your amygdala activates, your cortisol rises, your body prepares for threat, even if none exists. And if enough people believe something is true, they begin to act as if it's true. And when millions behave the same way, it becomes true. That's how money works. That's how borders exist. That's how nations survive. Not because they're real, but because enough people agree to pretend they are. This is consensus reality, a hallucination we synchronize through repetition. And what happens when someone steps outside of it? They're called delusional, or dangerous, or revolutionary, but often they're just seeing something the rest of us refuse to. Let's go deeper. In 2003, scientists discovered that when you wear goggles that flip your vision upside down, after a few days, your brain readjusts. It flips the world back. You don't see upside down anymore. You see normal, because your brain adapts not to what's true, but to what's consistent. This is how people stay in abusive relationships, in cults, in cycles of self-sabotage, because what matters most to the brain is predictability, even if it's hell. Now think about collective delusions, mass hysteria, moral panics, financial bubbles. In 1518, a group of people in Strasbourg began dancing uncontrollably for days, some until death. No cause was found. Historians now believe it was a psychic contagion. What does that tell you? That the mind doesn't need a reason to create reality. It needs a script. And if enough minds follow the same script, the hallucination stabilizes, and we call it real. Let's talk about time. You believe in past, present, future, but physics doesn't. Einstein's theory of relativity shows that time is not absolute. It bends, it stretches, it dilates depending on speed and gravity. From a physics perspective, all points in time exist simultaneously. It's your consciousness that experiences them linearly. Time isn't ticking. You are dot, and so reality isn't a fixed structure. It's a subjective rendering, a hallucination filtered by biology, shaped by culture, and reinforced by social agreement. So here's the 12th cheat code. Reality is not what exists. It's what persists under shared delusion. You think you're grounded in truth, but you're floating in language, memory, prediction, conformity. You see the world not as it is, but as you were taught to see it, and everything that doesn't fit your lens gets called false, dangerous, or insane. So tell me, if your reality is just a hallucination you've agreed not to question, then what would it take to wake up? Time is a trick of the observer. You think time flows, that the past is behind you, the future ahead, and the present is a tiny sliver you call now. You believe time moves like a river, carrying you forward. But here's the cheat code. Time isn't flowing. You are. Let's begin with the model you trust. Seconds, minutes, hours, calendars, schedules, deadlines, birthdays, anniversaries, aging. You believe time is external, a background stage on which events occur. But modern physics, the kind used to send probes across galaxies, says that's false. Einstein's relativity shattered the idea of absolute time. Time, like space, is relative. It stretches and shrinks depending on speed and gravity. A clock on a satellite ticks faster than a clock on Earth. A clock near a black hole slows to a crawl. 2. People moving at different speeds will disagree about when things happen. Not because of perception, but because time itself behaves differently for each of them. There is no universal now. There is no shared present. Time is not a river. It is a fabric, distorted by mass, motion, and observation. Still think it's simple. Let's go deeper in quantum physics. Time becomes even stranger at the smallest scales of existence. Particles behave unpredictably, not as solid things, but as probability waves, and when you observe them, they collapse into a single outcome. This means the act of observing doesn't just measure time, it creates the experience of it. Your consciousness doesn't pass through time, it carves it. Now consider the block universe theory, the idea that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. From this view, time doesn't pass. All events are already laid out in a four-dimensional structure. You aren't moving through time. You're unfolding your perception, like reading a book one word at a time. But the book is already written, so the future doesn't arrive. You just become aware of it. You're not the passenger. You're the lens scanning the film, and this film, it doesn't care what order you believe it comes in. Let's bring this closer to home. Think about how your brain tracks time. You don't perceive time directly. You infer it. Time feels fast when you're distracted. Time feels slow when you're in pain. Time disappears in flow. Time stretches in boredom, which means subjective time is entirely emotion dependent. Your mind is the metronome, not the universe and memory. That's your only anchor. But as we've seen, memory is unreliable. So if your memories are lies and your emotions distort the rhythm, what exactly are you measuring? Now look at culture. In the West, time is linear, past to future. In many Eastern cultures, time is cyclical. In indigenous traditions, time is layered, past, present, and future coexisting. And yet you believe your clock is the right one. Why? Because your society monetized time. Time became currency. Labor became hours. Sleep became guilt. Productivity became morality. You don't ask, how do I feel? You ask, how much did I get done? Your calendar is a cage. Your planner is a prophecy. And you serve time like a god who never loved you. You think procrastination is laziness, but often it's resistance to forced time. Your body knows the lie, but your schedule drowns the signal. Let's talk about aging. You think you age because time passes, but cells don't count time. They respond to entropy, damage, oxidation, telomere shortening. And guess what? Studies show that belief affects aging. People who associate aging with decline deteriorate faster. Those who believe age brings wisdom remain more resilient. Cognitively and physically, your mind modulates the speed of decay. Time doesn't age you. Expectation does. Still think your wrinkles are the clock's fault. Now let's get darker. Time creates regret. If only I'd known. If I had another chance. If I could go back. But all regret rests on the belief that the past is changeable in principle. You think you should have known better. But knowing better only exists now. You punish the version of yourself who didn't have access to your current insight, as if they could have acted from a future that hadn't yet arrived. This is emotional time travel. And it's a trap, because the truth is, you never could have done anything else. Not then. Not with that mind, that fear, that context. Regret is grief disguised as self-blame. It says, if I suffer enough, maybe I can rewrite the clock. But you can't, because there is no clock. There is only this breath, this page, this flicker of awareness. You think the present is small, but in truth, it's the only thing that ever exists. The past is memory. The future is simulation. You are always here, but your mind is rarely with you. So here's the 13th cheat code. Time is not a river carrying you forward. It's a mirror that reflects only what you're willing to see. You don't run out of time. You run out of presence, and then blame the clock. So tell me, if time is just the language you use to measure change, what would life feel like if you stopped measuring? Progress is a myth that hides the rat you believe in progress. You believe the world is getting better, cleaner, smarter, more ethical, more advanced. You believe we're climbing some invisible staircase toward utopia. But here's the cheat code. Progress is not forward motion. It's selective decay repackaged as evolution. Let's begin with your story of history. You were taught that we moved from tribes to cities, to empires to democracy, from bloodshed to law, from ignorance to science, from superstition to enlightenment. And yes, some things improved. Medicine, lifespan, technology, connectivity. But at what cost? We didn't solve suffering. We outsourced it. You don't see the sweatshops that make your clothes. You don't smell the blood in your smartphone. You don't hear the screams in the lithium mines. You just see innovation. Progress is when the pain moves far enough away that you can pretend it doesn't exist. Now look at GDP, the holy number that says we're growing. But GDP doesn't measure wellness. It doesn't measure ecological collapse. It doesn't subtract prison labor or anxiety pills or oil spills. It just adds war increases, GDP, cancer treatments, increased GDP, mass shootings, followed by gun sales, increased GDP. Your progress is built on a calculator with no minus key. Still think we're ascending. Let's go deeper. You think democracy is progress, but modern democracies are run by corporate oligarchies, where lobbying is legal bribery and campaigns are marketing arms of private wealth. You get to vote, yes, but on choices pre-selected by systems designed to protect capital. You call it freedom, but it's a menu with two flavors of the same poison. Progress didn't liberate you. It made you compliant. Now think about technology. You carry the world in your pocket. Infinite information, infinite stimulation. But are you wiser, calmer, more connected? Or are you drowning in dopamine loops, addicted to novelty, unable to focus for more than 8 seconds? You were promised access. You got algorithmic manipulation. You were promised community. You got performance and isolation. Technology didn't make you more human. It made you more predictable. Now consider medicine. Yes, we cured diseases, but we also medicalized emotion, pathologized grief, turned sadness into serotonin deficits and trauma into prescriptions. Instead of asking why you're in pain, we ask how fast we can numb you, and the biggest medical advances, they go to the wealthy. The poor still die of preventable illness. Progress is a scalpel. It saves one hand while letting the other rot. Let's talk about climate. We build electric cars while strip mining Earth to power them. We ban plastic straws while pouring billions of gallons of oil into the ocean. We praise green innovation while cutting down the Amazon to grow soy. This is not progress. This is greenwashed collapse. The planet is burning. The air is thick. The water is poisoned. And we call it the Anthropocene, the age when man became God and killed the garden. Still proud of your civilization. Now look inward. Has human suffering decreased? We have therapy, philosophy, spirituality, self-help, but anxiety, depression, suicide, addiction, all on the rise. Why? Because material advancement didn't evolve the soul. Because speed didn't teach us stillness. Because abundance didn't teach us meaning. We built skyscrapers without building resilience. We sent rockets to Mars while ignoring the bodies sleeping in our streets. This isn't progress. It's delusion with better Wi-Fi. Let's talk about moral progress. Yes, slavery was abolished in law, but forced labor persists. Yes, women can vote, but gender-based violence remains endemic. Yes, we have civil rights, but systemic racism adapts, invisibly, insidiously. Every gain is met with mutation. Power evolves faster than justice. You think we've come so far, but the boot didn't vanish. It just learned to smile while stepping on your neck. Now, let's get psychological. Progress gives you a story. We're better now. We're smarter. We're growing. This story calms the panic. It numbs the guilt. It justifies your comforts. But it's a fairy tale. Progress is not linear. Civilizations rise and fall. Rights are granted and revoked. Wisdom is found and forgotten. Rome thought it was eternal. So did every empire before it crumbled into dust. The lie of progress is that we are immune to decay, but we're not, and every skyscraper you build is just another tower of Babel, reaching skyward while the foundations crack. So here's the 14th cheat code. Progress is not salvation. It is seduction. A narrative whispered to keep you chasing a future that doesn't exist. It tells you, you're better now, so you don't ask what you've lost. It tells you, we're winning, so you ignore who's bleeding. It tells you, we're evolving, while the same old demons wear new names. So tell me, if progress is just the anesthesia of the privileged, what are you pretending not to feel while the world smiles back at you with dying eyes? Death is the only honest thing you'll ever meet. You treat death like a stranger, a dark figure at the edge of your vision, a later problem, an interruption. But here's the cheat code. Death isn't an event. It's the only thing in your life that's never lied to you. Let's begin with the illusion of distance. You tell yourself death is far away, something that happens to others, to the old, to the sick, to the unlucky. But death has always been near. It watches you blink. It studies your habits. It memorizes your heartbeat. Every cell in your body carries a timer. Every breath is a countdown. And you've known this since the moment you became aware, but you learned to flinch from it, to silence it with distraction, to drown it in plans. Still, it waits, not because it hates you, but because death is the only character in your story that doesn't play pretend. Love lies, memory lies, language lies, even your own mind betrays you. But death never changes its terms. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what you built. It doesn't care what you meant. It arrives, and in doing so, it exposes everything else as temporary. Now, let's talk about fear. You don't fear death. You fear being forgotten. You fear irrelevance. You fear none-being . And so you perform. You archive. You create digital ghosts, posts, pictures, text, praying they outlive you. You say, I want to leave a legacy. But what you mean is, I want to matter when I'm no longer here to witness it. But even that is delusion. In a few generations, your name will be forgotten. Your memories will dissolve. Your lineage will blur. And one day, someone will say, your name for the last time, and even that moment will vanish into the heat death of a silent universe. Still think you're immortal through impact. Now let's turn toward ritual. Cultures build religions, not just to explain life, but to domesticate death, heaven, reincarnation, enlightenment, ancestors. These aren't truths. They're psychological scaffolding built so that death doesn't feel like theft. You believe in an afterlife not because it's likely, but because your mind cannot tolerate the void. You call it faith, but often it's just refusal. Refusal to accept that the story ends, and that the meaning you clung to was written in sand. Let's bring in Ernest Becker, author of The Denial of Death. He argued that all human culture is a death denial system, a way to suppress the terror of non-dash existence. Monuments, achievements, moral systems, these are not progress. They are defenses. We build empires not to flourish, but to distract ourselves from the cliff at the edge of consciousness. And when someone reminds us of death, we exile them, we mock them, we call them negative because they rupture the dream. Now think about your relationship with time. You rush, you plan, you postpone joy, you defer love because you believe there's more coming. I'll do it later. I'll fix it someday. I'll make peace when the time is right. But the only guarantee death ever gave you is this: you will not know when. You don't get to prepare. You don't get to negotiate. One day, without warning, your story will go unfinished, mid-sentence, mid-breath, mid-dash apology, still feel in control. Let's go deeper. What does death actually threaten? Not your body, but your identity, the you that you curated, the story you rehearsed, the mask you upgraded for approval. Death unmasks you. It doesn't care about your status. It doesn't care about your narrative arc. It erases the ego like wind erases footprints in a desert. You think that's tragic, but maybe that's the only honest thing you'll ever experience. Everything else is theater. Death is the end of the play. Now consider the paradox. Death gives life shape. If you were immortal, you'd have no urgency, no need for love today, no reason to forgive, no motivation to risk, to speak, to reach. You'd drift. It's because you die that today matters. It's because you vanish that your gaze, your words, your presence means something. You think death robs you, but death is what makes presence possible. The miracle isn't that you die. It's that you were ever here at all. That for one flicker, the atoms woke up. The dust looked at the stars. The silence formed a voice, and you called it you, but even. Now, you flinch, you scroll, you reframe. You ask, what's the takeaway? There is none. Death doesn't teach. It doesn't reward. It doesn't balance karma. It just arrives. So here's the 15th cheat code. Death is not your enemy. It is your mirror. It reflects your illusions. It humbles your ego. It interrupts the lie of permanence with the truth of return. Return to silence. Return to dust. Return to the nameless state before identity. So tell me, if death is the only thing that never lied to you, why do you spend your whole life pretending it's not the only thing that's real? The soul is a concept invented to escape accountability. You believe you have a soul, an eternal essence, a true self that transcends flesh, time, biology. You think it's the part of you that can't be touched, corrupted, or lost. But here's the cheat code. The soul is not proof of your purity. It's camouflage for your contradictions. Let's begin with why you needed a soul in the first place. You learned early that your body was fallible. It bleeds, hungers, lies, decays. You learned your thoughts weren't always noble. You hated people you loved. You fantasized about things that disgusted you. You watched yourself betray your values and smiled through it. And somewhere inside, you whispered, This can't be all there is. You needed a clean core. Something untouched by trauma, by shame, by evolution, that you invented the soul to escape the burden of being fully responsible for what you are. Because, if you have a soul, then your darkness isn't really you. Then your mistakes are less than you. Then your shadow is just a phase. The soul became a spiritual PR campaign. It sold the idea that deep down, you're good, even when your actions say otherwise, still feels sacred. Let's look at history. The concept of the soul appears across cultures, but not always in the form you think. In ancient Greece, Plato saw the soul as tripartite: reason, spirit, appetite. In Hinduism, Atman is the self that transcends illusion. In Christianity, the soul is judged, saved, or damned. Each vision is different. Each contradicts the others. Yet you've inherited the word soul as if it were a universal truth. But what if it's just a placeholder for confusion? What if the soul isn't a reality, but a reaction, a way to label what we don't understand? You feel awe, you feel love, you feel terror, and you say, that's my soul. But those feelings are biological. They can be induced with chemicals, psychedelics, trauma, meditation, sleep deprivation. All can create soul experiences. Still think the soul is untouchable. Now enter neuroscience. Scientists have searched for the self in the brain and found none. Split brain patients show that the mind can function as two separate selves. Frontal lobe injuries can erase personality. Tumors can create empathy or destroy it. The self, what you call your soul, is neurologically malleable. It shifts with injury, with age, with stimulation. So, what is eternal about you? Your memories fade. Your personality evolves. Your preferences change. Even your moral compass can be reprogrammed by experience. If the soul is you without the world, then what remains when everything you love, know, and fear is taken away? Silence or nothing. Let's consider the soul as a defense mechanism. You think of yourself as good, yet you cause pain, you lie, you ignore suffering. You love convenience more than justice, but the soul lets you split. I did something bad, but that's not who I really am, isn't it? The soul lets you maintain self-esteem without confronting the full consequences of your actions. It lets criminals say, I made a mistake, but I'm still a good person. It lets you believe in redemption without transformation. It's a loophole. Not a lighthouse, still want to be saved. Now bring in religion. The soul became currency, something that could be bought, lost, judged, redeemed. It became the justification for control. Obey or risk your soul. Believe or burn forever. Sacrifice or reincarnate as something lower. The soul was spiritual leverage, a leash. You weren't taught to love your soul. You were taught to fear losing it. Let's go deeper. You say the soul is where love lives, where meaning lives, where beauty is born. But those things are not unique to you. Animals grieve, trees communicate. Even AI can mimic compassion. So what makes your soul so special? You say, I'm conscious. But consciousness is not a soul. It's an emergent property of matter, a process, not a possession. You say, I feel deeply. But feelings are not divinity. They're neurochemical consequences. You say, I seek purpose. But so do viruses. Everything alive moves toward. Something still think your yearning proves your holiness. Here's a darker truth. The soul is often a projection of ego, a way to immortalize the self. You don't want to vanish. So you imagine a piece of you that can't die. You want to believe that love survives death, that pain was for something, that your existence isn't just a cosmic accident. But what if the soul is just a refusal? A refusal to accept that you are not permanent, that your kindness is contingent, that your evil is real, that you are not more than your biology. You are made of it. So here's the 16th cheat code. The soul is not your salvation. It's your alibi. You invented it to explain the unexplainable, to excuse the inexcusable, to dress your confusion in sacred robes. You cling to it, not because it's true, but because without it, you'd have to take full responsibility for every choice and admit that when the lights go out, that's it. So tell me, if the soul is just a story you tell yourself to avoid accountability, who are you when the story ends? Belief is just fear wearing makeup. You think belief is strength, that it's a foundation, a compass, a shield. You say, I believe in something, as if that makes you whole. But here's the cheat code. Belief isn't truth. It's anesthesia. It's fear dressed in confidence, trying not to tremble. Let's begin with the purpose of belief. You're born into a chaos you don't understand. You open your eyes to a world that can kill you, forget you, ignore you. You need shelter, not just physical, but cognitive. So you begin to believe that your parents love you, that the world makes sense, that you are special. But these aren't facts. They're emotional life jackets. You believe them because you need them, not because they're provable. And this is the pattern. You don't believe because you know. You believe because you're afraid not to. Still think belief is strength. Let's bring in Pascal's wager. The 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal argued that it's better to believe in God, because if you're wrong, the cost is minimal. But if you don't believe and God exists, the cost is eternal. But think about what this means. It's not faith, it's hedging. It's fear of consequence, dressed up as reverence. This is how most belief operates. You believe in God, not because you see Him, but because you can't tolerate the void. You believe in justice, not because it's consistent, but because you can't live in a world without it. You believe in love because you fear being unloved. You believe in meaning because you fear the silence. Belief is the opiate of uncertainty. Now, let's go deeper. Belief is sticky. Once it forms, it resists contradiction. This is confirmation bias. You seek evidence that supports what you already believe and ignore or distort anything that challenges it. The brain loves coherence more than accuracy. You don't want truth, you want consistency. This is why cults work, why conspiracy theories grow, why abusive ideologies persist, because belief rewards certainty even if it's wrong. And the stronger the belief, the harder it becomes to extract it, not because it's more true, but because it's more integrated into your identity. If your belief dies, a piece of you dies with it. Now, let's talk about ego defense. Belief is not just a worldview, it's armor. You believe in your goodness to avoid confronting your cruelty. You believe in fairness to avoid acknowledging your complicity. You believe in redemption so you can keep failing. Belief is how the ego survives. Cognitive dissonance. If you hurt someone but still believe you're kind, the belief cushions the guilt. If the world is unjust but you believe it's ultimately fair, the belief cushions the rage. Belief is a painkiller, not a compass. Still proud of your faith. Let's talk about belief in the self. You're told to believe in yourself. But what does that even mean? You don't know who you are. You don't control your thoughts. You contradict yourself every day. Believing in yourself is often code for ignoring your complexity. It says, I don't want to see the contradictions. I don't want to feel the insecurity. I want to feel certain, even if it's a lie. So we build personas. We post curated images. We repeat mantras. But none of it changes the truth. The self you believe in is a character under construction, and the moment you stop editing it, the mask slips. Let's move into societal belief. You believe in progress, in capitalism, in democracy, in the justice system. But belief isn't allegiance, it's sedation. You believe in the system because it's easier than imagining collapse. You tell yourself things are getting better because the alternative would paralyze you. You think the market will adjust. The people will rise. The arc of history bends toward justice. But none of these are truths. They're faith statements based on repetition, not evidence. They exist to soothe, not to clarify. Now examine how belief behaves under pressure. When your belief is threatened, you panic, you argue, you rationalize, you double down. Why? Because belief is not designed to adapt. It's designed to maintain identity. You believe in the story because without it, you don't know who you are. And this is the final deception. You think belief helps you grow, but often it's what keeps you from evolving. Belief creates boxes, walls, limits. You don't ask new questions because the belief already has the answer. You don't change because the belief says who you should be. You don't see clearly because the belief tells you what's real. So here's the 17th cheat code. Belief is not light. It's makeup applied to fear. So it doesn't look like panic. You wear it not to see the world, but to hide from it. You say, I believe. But what you really mean is, I can't face the void without a story. So tell me, if belief is just a costume for fear, then what's left when you're finally brave enough to be naked? Choice is a post-hoc justification for a reflex. You think you make choices, that you weigh options, consider consequences, and act with intent. You think the life you live is the result of your decisions. But here's the cheat code. Choice is not freedom. It's the story your mind tells to justify what your body already did. Let's begin with your brain. In 1983, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted a now famous experiment. He asked participants to flex their wrist whenever they wanted and to report the exact moment they decided to move. But brain scans told a different story. Libet found that the brain showed signs of intention hundreds of milliseconds before the person was aware of choosing. In other words, the body acted first. The mind explained it afterward. This wasn't a fluke. Dozens of follow-up studies confirmed it. Your conscious awareness of making a decision lags behind the neural activity that initiates it. Still think you're in charge. Now look at the illusion of, will you take a sip of coffee? You scratch your arm. You pick the blue shirt instead of the red. You feel like you chose. But most of your behavior is automatic, driven by habit, priming, biology, and conditioning. You're not choosing. You're reacting. Your mind just narrates the reaction to maintain the illusion of authorship. This is called the interpreter module, a system in your left brain that creates a coherent narrative out of your behavior, even when that behavior is unconscious or contradictory. You aren't choosing your life. You're explaining it. Let's get closer. Imagine walking into a room and seeing a table of desserts. You decide to eat the cake. But what led to that moment? Sleep deprivation, blood sugar levels, childhood associations, the lighting, The smell, the social pressure, the sound of someone else saying just one bite. By the time you reach for the fork, 1,000 variables have already nudged you toward the outcome. But because you can't see the variables, you say, I chose the cake. Choice is not the driver. It's the narrative stitched onto a flood of unseen forces now bring in marketing algorithms, architecture. Every color in a supermarket is designed to guide your eye. Every push notification is crafted to hijack your limbic system. Every slot machine, social media app, and storefront exploits dopaminergic reward loops evolved for survival. You think you're choosing what to consume, but your preference was engineered. Still think free will is yours. Let's look at trauma. You avoid intimacy. You sabotage success. You lash out or shrink down or say yes when you mean no. These aren't choices. They're defensive reflexes carved into your nervous system by past pain. And the worst part, you blame yourself. You say, I should have chosen differently. But choice doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a body, in a context, in a storm of impulses, ghosts, chemicals, and reflexes. Now consider language. The words you speak feel like choices, but language is auto-completion. You speak the phrases you've heard, the beliefs you inherited, the accents, tones, jokes, patterns your brain has stored from a lifetime of mimicry. Even your original thoughts are built from borrowed syntax, and yet you say, that's just how I am. What part of that was you? Let's talk about love. You think you choose who to love, but attachment patterns, pheromones, symmetry, trauma resonance, timing, these shape your attraction before your mind catches up. You say, I fell in love. Not, I selected this person based on logical evaluation, because love, like most decisions, is a physiological storm. You don't choose it. You're swept into it. Still think you're the one steering. Now let's move to identity. You chose your career, your beliefs, your style, your path. But how much of that was reaction? You were praised for one thing, punished for another. You followed approval. You avoided rejection. Your life is a trail of responses, not revolutions. Choice is a retrospective illusion, a justification ritual. It lets you believe you're sovereign even when you're following a script. Let's go deeper. Even when you feel conflicted, weighing options, struggling with a decision, that process is happening within constraints. You didn't build your attention span, your past experiences, your vocabulary, your fears. You say, I could have gone either way. But only one path felt safer, more familiar, less uncertain, so you call that freedom. But maybe choice is just the path of least resistance, wearing a crown. Here's the irony. Even now, as you read this, you feel like you're choosing to believe, or not. But that reaction is already shaped by your conditioning. You're not evaluating. You're filtering through your lens. And that lens was handed to you. So, here's the 18th cheat code. Choice is not autonomy. It's narrative. You are not the author of your life. You are the narrator of its inevitabilities. You walk through a maze you didn't design, then call the next turn free will. So tell me if your choices are just explanations for movements you didn't start. Who's writing the script you're so sure you're directing? Hope is the most beautiful form of denial. You think hope is light. You call it strength, resilience, the thing that keeps people alive. You believe in its goodness, the way a drowning man believes in the sky. But here's the cheat code. Hope isn't strength. It's the prettiest lie you're allowed to keep. Let's begin with why hope feels sacred. It comforts you in waiting rooms. It softens the sound of a ticking clock. It sits beside you when nothing else can. But look closer. Hope is a future you fabricate to survive a present you refuse to accept. Hope tells you it will get better, you'll heal, they'll change. There's still time, but none of those are facts. They are coping fictions calculated to keep you compliant, quiet, and upright in unbearable circumstances. Hope is a sedative. It doesn't remove pain. It makes it tolerable so you won't scream loud enough to burn the system down. Still think it's virtue. Let's bring in Nietzsche, who called hope the worst of all evils, for it prolongs the torments of man. He wasn't being cruel, he was being accurate. Because hope doesn't just delay suffering, it extends it. You stay in the relationship because you hope they'll change. You stay at the job because you hope it will matter. You stay quiet because you hope the world will notice you without force. Hope tells you not to act because something might intervene, so you sit in slow decay, calling it patience. Now think about religion. Hope is its currency, you're told. There is a plan, there is a heaven, there is justice beyond what you can see. But what if there's not? What if the child dies for no reason? What if the guilty flourish forever? What if your suffering is not redeemed only endured? Hope says, don't ask those questions. Don't look too close. Keep the faith. Faith in what? That pain is part of some secret design, too mysterious for your mortal mind. That's not comfort. That's gaslighting at scale. Still kneeling. Now look at secular hope. You're told the world is progressing, that change is coming, that awareness is rising. But what are you really being told? That you shouldn't rage, that you shouldn't disrupt, that your role is to trust the process. The planet burns, justice shrinks, empathy dies under screens, and you are told to be hopeful, as if despair would make you irresponsible. But maybe despair is honest. Maybe hope is the soft leash they use to keep the herd from scattering. You think hope makes you brave, but often it's the last veil before surrender. It says, just one more day, just one more excuse, just one more reason to stay silent. Now go deeper, you say. Hope helps people survive. But what kind of survival? A battered woman stays, hoping he'll be kind. A dying man clings to treatment, hoping for a cure that won't come. A child waits at the window, hoping the parent who abandoned them will return. Is that strength, or is that emotional limbo, sanctified? You don't praise the courage to grieve. You praise the refusal to admit the end has come. Hope becomes a spiritual performance. Smile through agony. Call it growth. But some wounds don't make you wise. Some endings don't become beginnings. Some things just break, and hope won't save you. It will only make you wait longer to accept the break. Now, consider political hope. It's sold to you in speeches. This election will change things. This movement is different. This leader gets it. But history doesn't repeat. It rhymes with your denial. Every revolution devours its children. Every promise is currency. Every hope is marketed. Hope doesn't liberate you. It sedates you between betrayals. Still think it's noble. Let's talk about personal hope. You hope you'll become who you're meant to be. You hope you'll heal. You hope the damage didn't define you. But maybe it did. Maybe you don't recover. Maybe there's no coming back. Maybe the person you were before is gone, and what remains is a ghost trying to reanimate an old body. You call it resilience, but it's often just a refusal to admit, this version of me died, and no amount of hoping will bring it back. So here's the 19th cheat code. Hope is not light. It's a screensaver on a dead machine. It keeps you from facing the black mirror. It sings lullabies over explosions. It whispers fiction into your bones so you won't hear the silence screaming. Underneath, you don't need hope. You need the truth. And the truth is, some things won't get better. Some people won't come back. Some parts of you won't heal. And that doesn't mean you stop living. It means you stop lying about why you are. So tell me, if hope is just denial with a halo, what happens when you finally sit in the dark and stop begging for dawn? Healing is just elegant scar tissue. You think healing means returning to who you were. That with time, therapy, and forgiveness, you'll get back to the real you, the unbroken you, the innocent you, the pure self before the fracture. But here's the cheat code. There is no going back. There is no whole self to return to. Healing is not restoration. It's adaptation dressed in dignity. Let's begin with the myth that time heals all wounds. Time doesn't heal. Time distances. Time builds silence around pain until you can pretend it's not echoing anymore, but the wound, still there, still part of your architecture, still dictating how you walk, what you fear, who you trust. You don't forget. You are EFRAME, and the new frame is what you call growth. Still think that's healing. Let's bring in trauma science. When something shatters you, a betrayal, a death, a violation, it doesn't stay in your mind. It lodges in your nervous system. Your breath shortens. Your sleep fragments. Your reactions sharpen. Your body remembers, even when you pretend you don't. And what's worse, you start shaping your life around the wound. You avoid love because it once abandoned you. You shrink your joy because it once got punished. You smile through rage because it once got you hit. These are not healed behaviors. They are scar rituals. You're not recovering. You're rearranging. Now let's look at the healing industry. It sells you candles, journaling prompts, yoga mats, and mantras. It tells you to let go, to find your truth, to raise your vibration. But it rarely tells you this. Healing might not make you nicer. Healing might not make you whole. Healing might just make you more efficient at hiding the damage. You meditate to avoid panic. You affirm to suppress despair. You self-soothe instead of self-destruct. That's not wrong, but it's not salvation. Healing is often just graceful. Compensation. You adjust your limp so people stop noticing. You wear long sleeves over the burns. You master your triggers so you don't ruin dinner again. You call this strength, but strength is just pain with better posture. Still want your healed error? Let's talk about forgiveness. You think healing means forgiving? That if you let go of your anger, you'll find peace. But some wounds aren't meant to be forgiven. Some scars are meant to be named, not smoothed over. Forgiveness doesn't mean the wound was justified. It doesn't mean the pain was a lesson. It doesn't mean they deserve your mercy. Sometimes forgiveness is just fatigue. You're too tired to keep hating. So you release the weight, not to fly, but to stop sinking. That's not healing. That's survival math. Now think of your healing journey. How many versions of you died along the way? The one who trusted easily. The one who danced without armor. The one who spoke without rehearsing. Healing didn't resurrect them. It buried them carefully. You evolved, yes, but into someone who carries maps of landmines, someone who knows where not to step, someone who understands that light sometimes blinds worse than darkness. You call that wisdom, but it's just scar tissue with good vocabulary. Still want to keep going? Let's talk about emotional numbness. Many people think they're healed when they stop feeling, when the pain no longer stings, when they can tell the story without shaking. But numbness isn't resolution, it's shutdown. The nervous system gave up. It built a soundproof room inside. You unlocked the screaming there. You can function now, smile, work, date, but the screaming hasn't stopped. You've just learned how to drown it in routine. You think that's healing. Now, let's go deeper. What if healing doesn't fix you because there was nothing broken to begin with? What if what you call trauma was simply your body reacting appropriately to violation? What if your anxiety is a form of intelligence? What if your depression is a refusal to keep performing? What if your symptoms are not errors, but protests? And what if healing isn't quieting the protest, but learning to speak its language? Here's the truth. You don't get your old self back. You don't reclaim innocence. You don't reopen the door that trauma slammed shut. You build new rooms. You reinforce your foundation. You learn to live in a haunted house without pretending the ghosts moved out. So here's the 20th cheat code. Healing is not holy. It's not pure. It's not clean. It's blood under fingernails. It's waking up sweating. It's crying in bathrooms and smiling in meetings. It's carrying your wound like a locket, not because it's beautiful, but because it's yours. You want to heal, then grieve who you used to be. Make peace with who you'll never become, and learn to sit with the fact that you survived. Not unscarred, but erased. So tell me, if healing is just the art of living with what will never be undone, how long will you keep pretending you're on your way back to some place you can never return to? The mirror doesn't show you who you are. It shows what you'll tolerate. You look into the mirror and think you see yourself. A face, a body, a name. You believe the reflection is neutral, a fact, not a judgment. But here's the cheat code. The mirror is not a witness. It's a negotiation. What you see isn't who you are. It's what you've agreed to accept, or what you've been conditioned not to resist. Let's start with the illusion. You think you see reality. You think your reflection is accurate. You think the mirror doesn't lie. But mirrors don't reflect you. They reflect your self-concept. And your self-concept was shaped long before you understood mirrors. It was shaped by what got praised, by what got punished, by how others reacted when you walked into a room. You didn't learn to see yourself. You learned to see yourself through their gaze. The mirror simply became the place where that gaze lived. Still, think that's self-awareness. Let's talk about body image. You stand naked before a mirror, and what do you see? Too much. Not enough, wrong, flawed, a project. You don't see a body. You see a hierarchy of judgments layered over skin. You see comparisons, failures, expectations dressed up as beauty, and you call that self-recognition. No, that's internalized. Surveillance. You've memorized the rules of a system that profits from your shame. And the mirror became your compliance checkpoint. Now let's move deeper. The mirror doesn't show you your truth. It shows you your threshold. How much disconnection can you tolerate? How much disappointment can you ignore? How many masks can you wear before you forget there's a face underneath? You say, "This is who I am." But maybe that's just who you've stopped resisting being. You settled into a version of yourself that hurts, just enough to stay awake, but not enough to demand revolution. You made a deal with the reflection. I won't question too much. If you don't scream too loud, now consider shame. Shame lives in the mirror. It speaks in posture, in hesitation, in the tiny flinch when someone compliments you. You say thank you, but inside, the voice whispers. They don't really mean it. They don't know the real you. Where did that voice come from? A parent, a bully, a betrayal you never recovered from, and yet now, it speaks with your own mouth. You think the mirror shows you, but it echoes the person who first taught you you were too much, or not enough. Still think you're seeing clearly. Let's talk about performance. You don't dress to express yourself. You dress to become tolerable, to fit into spaces that would devour your raw form. You don't walk like yourself. You walk like someone who learned to take up less space. You don't speak like yourself. You speak like someone who learned when it's safe to be heard. And then you look in the mirror and say, that's me. But what if you're not seeing yourself? What if you're seeing your adaptation? What if the reflection is just a mask so convincing that even you forgot it wasn't your face? Now, look at your emotional mirror. You think you know your worth, but your self-worth is not measured by your mirror. It's measured by what you settle for, the relationship you stay in, the apology you never ask for, the silence you call peace. You don't tolerate pain because you're strong. You tolerate it because you've memorized it. You've worn pain like a second skin for so long. It stopped feeling like violence and started feeling like identity. And now the mirror says, this is who you are. But what it really means is, this is who you've agreed to be. Now, let's touch the most dangerous mirror, the one inside. When you close your eyes and picture yourself, who do you see? Do you see someone brave, or someone trying to be seen as brave? Do you see someone kind, or someone trying not to be abandoned? Do you see someone healed, or someone who's just become excellent at not bleeding in public? Self-image is not self-awareness, it's branding, a private mythology built to protect you from collapse. And the mirror, it's the altar where you worship the image and pray. The pain doesn't leak through the cracks. So here's the 21st cheat code. The mirror doesn't reflect who you are. It reflects what you've stopped resisting. It shows you the compromises, the edits, the silent agreements. It reflects back the version of yourself that hurt the least to become. And if you ever dare to ask for more, if you ever dare to question the default, to strip away the layers, you might see something raw, something unfamiliar, something terrifying, something real. So tell me, if the mirror only shows you what you've learned to tolerate, then who might you become if you finally stopped making peace with your own distortion? Control is just fear with better branding. You think control is power, that it means agency, discipline, mastery. You believe that controlling your environment, your future, yourself, makes you safe. But here's the cheat code. Control isn't strength. It's fear in a suit and tie, pretending it knows what it's doing. Let's start with the myth that to be in control is to be free. But control is not freedom. Control is containment, it says. If I predict it, it can't hurt me. If I master it, it can't leave me. If I control myself, maybe I'll be lovable. But this isn't empowerment. It's survival dressed as competence. Let's talk about your routines, your calendar, your diet, your boundaries. Are they choices, or are they rituals of protection, designed to manage the chaos you were too young to survive? You weren't born a control freak. You were made into one by betrayal, by unpredictability, by watching love turn into punishment without warning, So you became vigilant. You became structured. You became tightly wound in the name of stability, and the world called it admirable. Still think this is strength. Now look at your relationships. You choose partners who won't leave. You set boundaries that keep you unchallenged. You communicate in ways that maintain control over how others see you. This isn't intimacy. This is emotional management. You don't connect. You curate. You don't feel. You forecast because to truly open, to surrender, to not know, to be seen without a filter, would risk being that powerless child again. And so, you control, you call it healing. But it's just regulated fear. Let's move into productivity. You control your time, your output, your success. You build systems. You optimize. You gamify your day. But what are you actually avoiding? Stillness, boredom, the voice that asks, what happens if you stop? You don't want freedom. You want predictable achievement, because somewhere deep inside, your worth is measured by how well you perform painlessness. You control your image, so no one can guess how chaotic it feels inside. And it works, until it doesn't. Still calling. That growth. Now consider, the body control shows up in the muscles, in the gut, in the posture. You hold tension in your jaw. You clench your fists without knowing. You sleep light. You breathe shallow. Why? Because the body remembers what it was like to have no say, and it's never relaxed since control becomes a nervous system religion. You bow to it daily, not because it serves you, but because the alternative is surrender, and surrender feels like death. Let's talk about ambition. You want control over your future, your career, your reputation. You say, I have a vision, but maybe it's just a fantasy of immunity. If you're successful enough, no one can hurt you. If you're respected enough, they won't leave. If you're powerful enough, you won't have to beg for kindness. You call it purpose, but maybe it's just a trauma response with a LinkedIn profile. Still think you're driving the ship. Now, examine your self-control. You restrict, you suppress, you discipline yourself into neatness. You say, I'm doing the work. But maybe your work is just obedience to the voice that once punished your chaos. You're not free. You're trained, and when you lose control, when the plan shatters, the relationship ends, the body breaks. You don't just grieve, you panic, because control was your god. And the god has no mercy, still want to be high-functioning. Let's get darker. Control doesn't eliminate risk. It just creates the illusion of safety, a bubble that eventually pops, and when it does, you're more shattered than someone who never relied on it, because control doesn't make you stronger. It makes you more fragile. The tighter you hold, the more it hurts when things fall apart, and they will fall apart. Here's the truth. Control is just fear with a dress code. It smiles, it shakes hands, it earns praise, it builds empires. But underneath, it's a child screaming, please don't let it happen again. So here's the 20-second cheat code. Control is not mastery. It's fear rehearsed into habit and mistaken for empowerment. You don't control because you're capable. You control because you're terrified. And the hardest thing you'll ever do is not to gain more control, but to learn how to live without it. So tell me, if the safety you built through control was always a stage set for an audience that never came, what happens when the spotlight burns out and no one's clapping anymore? Intelligence is a defense mechanism, not a virtue. You take pride in being intelligent. You were praised for it, rewarded, admired, envied. It's the trait you think defines you, the thing that makes you safe. But here's the cheat code. Intelligence isn't a virtue, it's a mask, a survival strategy, a sharp blade forged by fear and wielded like worth. Let's start with the lie, that intelligence means insight, that it leads to truth, that the smarter you are, the closer you are to wisdom. But intelligence isn't wisdom. Wisdom comes from surrender, from breakage, from silence. Intelligence, it comes from avoidance. You think faster than your feelings. You analyze before you empathize. You dissect the world because it's safer than being in it. You weren't born this way. You became this way because once, when you were vulnerable, you were laughed at, dismissed, ignored, punished, so you sharpened your mind into armor. You learned to outthink before you could outcry, still think you're gifted. Let's talk about intellectualization, a defense mechanism so subtle. You mistake it for enlightenment. You feel hurt, so you study the psychology of pain. You feel abandoned, so you read about attachment theory. You feel like dying, so you write an essay on existential dread. You wrap your suffering in language. You give it footnotes. You call it understanding, but none of this is healing. It's just pain wearing a lab coat. You don't process emotions. You translate them into systems. You don't grieve. You theorize about grief stages. You don't live, you observe. Yourself living like a scientist watching a rat in a maze. Still think you're wise. Let's talk about identity. When you don't feel lovable, you try to be impressive. When you don't feel enough, you try to be irreplaceable. When you can't control connection, you control perception, so you become the smart one. You lead with your mind because it's the only part of you that didn't feel dirty, weak, or broken. But here's the truth. Your intelligence isn't who you are. It's who you had to become to feel like you mattered. You use it to survive, to earn belonging, to escape vulnerability. And the smarter you get, the more elegant your defenses become. Now look at your relationships. How many people have you pushed away because they couldn't keep up with you? You say they bored you, that they didn't challenge you, but maybe they just saw you and that was intolerable. Because if they see past your intellect, they might find the wounds, and you've worked too hard to make your mind a fortress with no front door, still think you're superior. Let's talk about intelligence addiction. You crave novelty, complexity, answers, but not because you're curious, because you're terrified of stillness. Stillness is where the pain lives, the parts of you that can't be solved, the memories that don't fit into frameworks, so you devour information. You build mental castles. You become fluent in everything. But your own heart, that's not growth, that's evasion. Now consider success. Your intelligence may get you degrees, money, status, respect, but it also isolates you, because you don't just want to be understood, you want to be untouchable. And when someone challenges you, you don't get curious. You destroy, you correct, you condescend, you dominate, because your ego doesn't run on love. It runs on being right. Still think intelligence is neutral. Let's go deeper. The more intelligent you become, the harder it is to be present. You over intimacy, you diagnose conversations, you narrate your own emotions in real time, as if life is a documentary and you're both subject and narrator. You don't feel, you interpret, and this becomes your tragedy, that the smarter you get, the less alive you feel, because intelligence unchecked becomes disassociation, a beautiful one, a celebrated one, but still a form of escape. So here's the 23rd cheat code. Intelligence is not a virtue. It's a brilliantly constructed shield that keeps you 2 steps ahead of humiliation, intimacy, and grief. It's a way to control how you're seen, a way to rewrite what hurt, a way to live without surrender. But here's the question you're afraid to ask. What's behind the intellect? What's underneath the analysis? Who are you when there's nothing to solve? What's left when the applause stops and the books close and no one cares how clever you sound? So tell me, if your intelligence is just the armor that kept you from being crushed, what happens when you finally realize it's also what's keeping you from being touched? Discipline is not strength. It's a trauma response in disguise. You admire the disciplined. You strive to be one of them. The early riser, the relentless worker, the person who never quits. You call it willpower, grit, strength. But here's the cheat code. Discipline is often not strength. It's an adaptation born of fear, shame, and survival. A trauma response dressed up as virtue. Let's begin with the glorification. You're told to wake up at 5 a.m. to push through pain, to master routine, to control the body, to dominate your impulses. But rarely does anyone ask, why? Why do you need to control so much? What are you so afraid will happen if you simply rest? You say you're driven, but what if you're just running? Let's go deeper. The world taught you lazy is bad. Rest is weakness. Stillness is sin. So you learned to grind. You learned to prove. You learned to outwork the silence. But discipline, for many, is not rooted in empowerment. It's rooted in hypervigilance. Because somewhere in your past, you learned that if you stop moving, you'll be punished, abandoned, shamed, forgotten. So now you stay busy. You stay productive. You stay in control. Not because you're strong, but because stopping feels like death. Still think discipline is power. Let's examine childhood. Were you praised for being good, quiet, obedient, high-achieving? Were you loved more when you performed? Did affection come with strings? Did you learn to equate your worth with output? If so, then your discipline isn't a triumph. It's a wound that whispers, if I'm not exceptional, I'll be unloved. Still proud of your work ethic. Let's talk about control. You schedule every minute. You optimize your routines. You track your habits. You micromanage your life. But control is not clarity. Control is compensation for chaos, for uncertainty, for the terror of unpredictability that once shattered your nervous system. Discipline becomes your way of fencing off the unknown, of pretending the world is safe so long as you follow the rules. Still think that's freedom. Let's look at burnout. You run until your body breaks. You produce until joy dies. You perform until your soul goes numb. And even then you feel guilty for stopping. Why? Because your discipline is fused with your identity. And if you slow down, you fear you'll disappear. You're not building a life. You're trying to outrun collapse. And the irony, collapse is already inside you. Still want to push harder. Let's talk about shame. You call yourself lazy if you sleep in, undisciplined if you take a break, a failure if you're not achieving. But what if that inner drill sergeant is just an internalized parent, coach, boss, abuser? What if the you that demands perfection isn't really you, but a ghost you never stopped obeying? Still calling that ambition? Let's examine morality. You think discipline makes you better, more noble, more worthy of respect, but often it makes you less human, less spontaneous, less gentle, less able to be present. You become a machine running on performance, confusing rigidity with integrity, but discipline without compassion is just self-violence. Still think you're becoming your best self. Here's the 30th cheat code. What you call discipline may actually be your nervous system screaming, "Don't stop, or you'll feel everything you've buried." You weren't born needing to hustle. You were taught to perform so others wouldn't leave. You weren't born needing a 5-step morning routine. You just needed a ritual to make the anxiety tolerable. You weren't born to optimize your existence. You just inherited a world that told you survival means productivity. But maybe true strength isn't found in discipline, but in what happens when you finally stop. So let me ask, if you didn't feel the need to earn love, prove your worth, or outrun shame, would your discipline still exist? Or would it collapse into silence you're too terrified to face? Free will is a story you tell yourself to endure the card you believe in choice. You trust in decisions. You claim agency, responsibility, identity. You say, "I decided, I chose, I wanted." But here's the cheat code. Free will is not proof of freedom. It's the most elegant myth you've ever been sold. A bedtime story for the mind to cope with its prescription imprisonment. Let's start with the illusion that you're steering the ship, that you chose your beliefs, your dreams, your partner, your religion, your politics, even your preferences. But from the very beginning, your choices were sculpted by what was available. And what was available was decided by everything except you. Culture, geography, language, trauma, history, neurochemistry. You didn't choose your brain. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose your first fear. Still think you're in control. Let's talk about timing. Neuroscience has shown that the brain registers decisions before you're aware of them, milliseconds before your consciousness says, "I chose." Your biology has already pulled the trigger. Your will is not free. It's post-rationalized. You don't choose. You notice yourself choosing after your neurons have fired. Still think the self is the driver. Let's go deeper. You say you made a decision, but let's examine the conditions. Was your decision made in joy or to avoid guilt? Did you choose from abundance or from fear of rejection? Did you follow intuition or the echo of an old authority figure you still haven't disobeyed? So much of your freedom is just reaction, a defense, a rerun of your programming with better lighting, still calling that agency. Let's examine morality. You think you're good because you chose to be, but maybe you just had the privilege of safe environments, reinforcing structures, the luxury of therapy, the absence of desperation, and the person you judge for bad choices, maybe they never had a real option, only a series of survival tactics. Free will only exists in systems that allow alternatives, and for most, those alternatives are an illusion. Still think you're superior? Let's go even further. The marketplace of ideas, curated, the social media, that shapes your desires, engineered, the sense of self that narrates your story, constructed by forces you cannot see. Every decision is filtered through language, emotion, past, chemistry, context, and you claim freedom because you can choose between two cages. Still think that's autonomy? Let's examine desire. You crave certain things, you think they come from within, but most of your wants were installed. You want love in the way your caregivers gave or withheld it. You want success in the way your culture defines it. You want beauty in the way your media displays it. Your wants are not sacred, they are scaffolded. Desire is the leash. You only think it's freedom because the rope is invisible, still calling that will. Let's talk about justice. We punish people as if they had full autonomy. We shame ourselves as if we did too. But if choices are determined by trauma, biology, and environment, then who exactly are we punishing? We built a world on responsibility to avoid confronting the truth. We are all puppets with the illusion of choice stitched into our mouths. Still believe in consequences. Here's the 31st cheat code. Free will is the polite mask your mind wears to survive the horror of cause and effect. It lets you feel noble in pain, worthy in success, guilty in failure. Because if you had no choice, then what is identity? Just a movie you're forced to watch, where you pretend the protagonist has agency so the ending still matters. So answer this. If every choice you've made was only ever the next domino in a long chain of inevitabilities, what then is left of you? You think you're learning, but you're only remembering what they allowed you to see. You pride yourself on being curious. You read, you study, you think deeply. You collect facts, trivia, theories, histories. You call it growth. You call it awareness. But here's the cheat code. You are not discovering truth. You are rearranging approved information inside a very small room and mistaking it for a window. Let's begin with education. You were taught to memorize, to repeat, to absorb, to pass tests, but you weren't taught to question the structure itself. You weren't taught to doubt the curriculum. You weren't allowed to ask, why is this the version of history I'm being fed? From a young age, your understanding of the world was filtered by what the system deemed appropriate. Still think you were educated. Let's talk about history. You were told stories, glorious victories, righteous causes, names of leaders, dates of revolutions. But you weren't told who wrote the stories, or what was omitted, or why your textbooks skipped entire genocides, entire civilizations, entire betrayals. You learned a narrative, not the truth. Still think you know the past. Let's examine science. You believe in facts, in data, in experiments, but even science is shaped by power. What gets funded, what gets published, what gets suppressed. Whole avenues of inquiry are buried because they challenge existing industries, governments, or belief systems. Still think science is neutral. Let's talk about media. You consume information, news, podcasts, documentaries, books. But who owns the channels? Who selects the headlines? Who edits the footage? Your knowledge is not a reflection of the world. It's a curated lens. You are not informed, you are fed. Still think you're awake. Let's go deeper. You think you've changed your mind, that you've grown. But often, what you call insight is just social permission to think a new thought. You didn't invent the idea. You just noticed that it became acceptable to say out loud. Still think you're original. Let's look at algorithms. You open your phone, you scroll, you explore, but the algorithm isn't showing you the world. It's showing you a mirror, a distorted feedback loop of what you already think, what you already feel, what keeps you angry or buying or scared. And every suggested video, every related article tightens the cage. Still think you're making informed choices. Let's talk about forbidden knowledge. There are truths so dangerous they've been burned, buried, silenced. Truths about power, control, mind, reality. And when someone gets too close, we don't debate them. We label them crazy, conspiracist, extremist. The labels are the guards at the gates of deeper understanding. Still think you're rational. Here's the 36th cheat code. You don't learn, you inherit. What you call knowledge is just permissioned. Memory, you remember what the world allowed you to know. You believe what was reinforced. You forget what was never shown. You build your identity on foundations you didn't examine, using words you didn't invent, in structures you didn't question. So let me ask, if everything you believe is a product of the information you were allowed to see, who would you be if all of that had been different? You were never meant to be alone, so why are you so isolated? You scroll, you check your phone, you reply with hearts, thumbs, fire emojis, you video call, you swipe, you comment LOL when you're not laughing. But here's the cheat code. You are surrounded by connection, yet starving for intimacy, because what you've been sold isn't belonging, it's bandwidth. Let's begin with biology. You are a social animal. Your brain evolved to sync. Mirror neurons fire when others feel. Touch regulates your nervous system. Facial expressions help your body understand what's safe. Loneliness, to your biology, is not a feeling, it's a survival threat. Being alone used to mean death, exile, exposure, starvation. So when you feel isolated, your body panics still. Think this is just in your head. Let's talk about civilization. Communities used to be tight. Tribes, villages, generations under one roof. You ate together, you worked together, you suffered together, you existed together. Now you live in boxes. You commute alone. You order food from strangers. You cry into glowing rectangles. And when you do see people, it's performance, not presence. Still think this is evolution. Let's examine digital life. You connect with thousands, but who really sees you? Who hears your silence? Who notices your absence? But you're invisible. You're liked, but not known. You perform joy, but feel empty. Still think that's community. Let's go deeper. You've been taught independence is strength, that needing others is weak, that self-sufficiency is power. So you say I'm fine. You say I got this. You say don't worry about me. But your soul is disintegrating from lack of witness. Still think isolation is strength. Let's talk about conversation. When was the last time someone looked at you and didn't wait to speak? Didn't fix you, didn't scroll while nodding, just listened, held space, reflected your existence. Now it's opinions, advice, content, noise, still calling that intimacy. Let's look at romantic connection. You're told to find your person, one partner to complete you, to hold your secrets, to heal your wounds. But when community collapses, we collapse into each other. We place the weight of an entire village on one person's shoulders. And then we wonder why they can't carry us. Still think love is enough. Let's examine attention. You're addicted to being seen, but only on your terms, filtered, cropped, edited, curated. And when someone sees past the mask, you flinch, you retreat, you panic, you crave connection, but fear exposure. You want to be loved, but don't know who you even is. Still think visibility is belonging. Here's the 37th cheat code. You were engineered to bond, but raised to isolate. Your loneliness is not a personal failure. It's a cultural design, a system that monetizes disconnection, that rewards self-reliance over interdependence, that turns friends into followers, presence into productivity. You're not broken, you're unwritten, ESSED. So let me ask, if you're nervous, system was built to co-regulate with others. How long can you survive before your body forgets how to feel safe at all? The system doesn't hate you, it just doesn't care if you die. You feel attacked, overworked, underpaid, unseen. You look at your government, your job, your healthcare, your debts, and you whisper, they're trying to kill me. But here's the cheat code. You are not being hunted. You are being ignored. And that is infinitely more dangerous. Let's begin with the myth. You were taught the system exists to protect you, to serve the people, to create opportunity, to keep the bad things out. But the truth is colder. The system is not evil. It is apathetic. It has no eyes, no ears, no soul. It is an algorithm made of paper, policy, and profit. Still thinks someone's in charge. Let's talk about institutions, hospitals, schools, courts, welfare, police, each built on principles, but run on budgets. You are not a citizen. You are a cost center. They don't need to punish you. They only need to not notice when you collapse. Still think this is about justice. Let's look at bureaucracy. Try getting help. Try calling. Try emailing. Try opening a ticket. The process itself is the punishment. Because if it takes long enough, you'll give up. Not because they hate you, but because your suffering is a rounding error. Still calling that red tape. Let's examine capitalism. You think you're part of a market. You think you have power as a consumer. But the system doesn't care if you can't afford rent, or medicine, or food. It will still sell you a new phone, a monthly subscription, a dopamine trap. Your loyalty is irrelevant. Your need is irrelevant. Your death is a non-event to the machine. Still think your choices matter. Let's talk about data. You are watched, tracked, sorted, labeled, but not to protect you, to exploit. You dot your likes, your searches, your fears, your cravings. The system doesn't care if you're healthy, only if you're clickable. Only if you're addicted, still think you're the customer. Let's go deeper. Try collapsing. Try going broke. Try getting sick. Try falling through the cracks. There is no safety net, only PR campaigns. And when you scream, you won't hear cruelty. You'll hear silence. Still think silence is mercy. Let's talk about politics. You vote, you donate, you believe in sides, but every side feeds the same engine. Every leader inherits the same gears. The machine doesn't change because the machine doesn't feel, it grinds. And you're the grist still. Think you're represented. Let's look at what happens when you die. No parade, no resistance, no alarm. The machine recalibrates, reassigns your tasks, sends a notification, moves on. You are not a martyr, you are a metric. Still think you'll be remembered. Here's the 38th cheat code. You are not targeted, you are ignored. And that's the true horror. Hate implies attention. War implies recognition. But indifference is structural, quiet, unstoppable. You suffer, not because the system is evil, but because it was never built to notice your pain. So let me ask, if the world you live in would not flinch at your disappearance, how do you convince yourself you're alive at all? Your personality is an emergency mask, not a self. You say, I'm an introvert, I'm confident, I'm a creative, I'm anxious. You wear these words like armor. You call them you. But here's the final cheat code. Your personality is not your identity. It's the emergency costume you put on to survive your earliest threats. Let's begin with childhood. You were born unshaped, a wild system of instincts, sensitivities, and possibilities. And then came the world. Loud voices, busy hands, invisible expectations. You learned what earned love, and what invited withdrawal. You adjusted, bent, folded. A silent algorithm began to write itself in your nervous system. Not, what do I feel, but, what keeps me safe? Still think you chose your personality? Let's talk about the good child. You became helpful, you smiled, you apologized, you performed calm. You learned to anticipate others' needs like a sixth sense. But this wasn't kindness. It was survival. You didn't want praise, you wanted protection. Still think you're naturally empathetic? Let's talk about the rebel. You challenged everything. You rejected norms. You made noise. You broke rules. But it wasn't defiance, it was defense. A way to mask the ache of abandonment. A way to say, if I destroy the system, maybe I won't need its love. Still think you were born wild? Let's look at the anxious one. You worried, you overthought, you prepared, you obsessed. But it wasn't because you're fragile. It was because chaos was your first language, and hypervigilance was how you translated love. Still think you're naturally nervous? Let's look at the confident one. You speak loudly, you lead, you charm, you win. But behind every performance is a child who learned that silence meant invisibility. You didn't crave power, you craved witness, still calling that self-assurance. Let's go deeper. Personality isn't who you are. It's who you became to function in an unsafe emotional economy. You adapted, strategized, camouflaged, but you forgot the disguise was temporary. You call it your character. You build your relationships around it. You brand yourself with it. You've become loyal to the mask. Still think that's authenticity? Let's examine what happens when the world changes. New job, breakup, grief, illness, silence. The old personality starts to feel foreign. You call it depression. You call it burnout. You call it crisis. But sometimes what you're experiencing is not breakdown, it's decompression. The mask is slipping, and beneath it isn't clarity. It's void. Still think that's healing? Let's talk about therapy. You want to find yourself, to know your true nature. But what if the truth isn't comforting? What if underneath the mask isn't a coherent self, but a shattered mirror of abandoned instincts and disowned shadows? Still think self-awareness feels good? Here's the final cheat code. Your personality is not your essence, it's your trauma's favorite outfit. It got you this far. It protected you. It served its purpose. But now, it keeps you from melting, from dissolving, from returning to the state before the mask. Not death, but self-erasure. And maybe that's the only real freedom. You'll never be allowed. So let me ask, if everything you believe to be you is just what you built to survive, what's left when you finally stop performing? Final collapse. The screen goes black. You wanted cheat codes, but you didn't want the truth they unlock. You wanted to win the game, not realize you were the game. There are no more secrets to uncover, only silence, only the echo of questions that shouldn't be answered, only the realization that the player, the mask, the story, the timeline, the you was never real. Just reflex, just conditioning, just echoes of fear inside a meat machine, desperate for meaning. So sleep now, not because you've earned rest, but because the illusion is tired of holding its breath. Good night.